Hey guys, tonight we begin with a journey unlike any other. A journey into the very fabric of our existence. Tonight we explore a question that has captivated minds for centuries, and yet continues to elude even our most brilliant thinkers. If reality is a simulation, who is running it? We will wander together through mysteries, anomalies, and strange phenomena that hint at a hidden structure beneath the world we think we know. We'll consider the whispers of eyewitnesses who have glimpsed beyond the veil, the curious coincidences that defy probability, and the scientific discoveries that suggest our universe may be more malleable than it seems. Throughout this documentary, we will explore multiple chapters, each delving into a unique aspect of this fascinating theory. From the glitches in our everyday reality, to the possible entities overseeing our existence, and even to the potential for communication with the architects themselves, we will navigate it all in a calm, reflective, and immersive way. Before we settle in and begin our peaceful journey, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Only if what I share here truly resonates with you. Your support helps me create more of these videos, and if you feel like it, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see the many corners of the world where we connect. Now, dim the lights, make yourself comfortable, and let's ease into tonight's journey together as we explore what lies ahead. Chapter 1. The Simulation Hypothesis. Is our reality artificial? Imagine lying on your back and watching a slow swirl of stars above a quiet field. Each star has a precision to its light, a rhythm that seems unfathomably deliberate. In 2003, a philosopher named Nick Bostrom stepped into that field of ideas and posed a careful, formal question. If a civilization were capable of running detailed simulations of entire worlds, of histories, minds, and weather, how would we know whether we are in one of them, and what are the odds that we might be? Bostrom's paper didn't shout a conclusion. It offered a logical ladder of possibilities, each rung asking us to take the next thought in silence. At its heart, the simulation hypothesis is a modest, curious suggestion. It is not an accusation against everyday life. It is a thought experiment that asks, given the growth of computing power, artificial intelligence, and the human appetite for knowledge, might one day be able to build a perfectly realistic virtual past or a world populated with conscious beings? If so, and if many such detailed simulations were run, then purely by probability, we might be living in one of those simulations rather than in the single original base reality. Now, fold that formal idea into the texture of the technologies we already know. Close your eyes for a moment and picture the gleam of a modern research lab, the quiet hum of server racks, the rush of code on a screen. Think about virtual reality systems that can immerse a person so completely their heartbeat changes. Think about artificial intelligences whose voices sound startlingly human. Think too of quantum computers probing patterns of information at scales that once belonged to physics only. Each of these is a mirror for the simulation idea. We have the basic metaphors, and we are gaining the tools that, in fiction and theory, could one day run universes. The scientific parallels are comforting in a restrained way. When scientists speak about modeling complex systems, weather patterns, ecological networks, or the evolution of galaxies, they turn messy, living reality into manageable data. That process, translated to an extreme, is exactly what the simulation hypothesis envisions. A system fine-grained enough to reproduce not only the movement of planets, but the texture of a single afternoon and the memory of a single smile. And then there are the strange corners of modern science, the places where our neat equations begin to shiver. Quantum mechanics, the whispery, luminous realm at the smallest scales, offers phenomena that have puzzled and enchanted researchers for a century. Particles that exist in multiple states at once, entanglement where distant particles correlate with eerie fidelity, the suddenness of measurement that seems to choose a reality from many possibilities. To some, these are simply deep mysteries of physics, but to others they look like fingerprints of a deeper information processing layer, the kinds of oddities you might expect if reality were being sampled, rendered, or occasionally asked to resolve a specific outcome. Consider an example in soft tones. Imagine a distant particle in a laboratory, quivering between two states until an observation nudges it one way or the other. Some thinkers suggest that this act of observation resembles a rendering process. Resolution increases when attention falls upon an area, like extra detail loading when you look closely at a 3D scene in a virtual world. It is a poetic image, yes, but it is also a way of translating scientific oddness into a conceptually graspable idea, a way to imagine how a simulated substrate might behave. Movement from the lab to the lived experience is seamless in this topic. There are the ordinary, quiet anomalies of human life that many of us have felt. Déjà vu, the sudden, ghostly certainty that this exact moment has occurred before. Prophetic dreams that arrive with unnerving clarity. Coincidences so precise they feel intentional. Trained scientists often caution that human memory and pattern seeking are imperfect, and that the mind loves to quicken when it finds connections. Yet the ubiquity of these experiences is striking. They're not footnotes, they're common pillows on which we rest our wonder. Let's sit with one such anecdote told in measured light. A teacher once shared, in an unremarkable coastal town, how she experienced an intense bout of déjà vu while grading papers on a rainy Thursday. The sensation was not a flicker, but a layered recollection. The smell of the coffee by her desk, the exact slant of rain on the window, the tiny coffee stain on a student's essay. A day later, a colleague confirmed having the exact same sensation that same afternoon, at the same table, but his memory included a different student's paper. These parallel, overlapping memories left both with an unsettled sense that something about that afternoon had momentarily broken its pattern and then resumed, as if a small patch of the day had been rerun with slight variations. Another account, shared quietly on an online forum and repeated across message boards, tells of a person who dreamt, more like witnessed, an event. A car crash at a particular intersection. 2 days later, they walked by that corner and observed the same crash, minor, with no injuries but with an uncanny alignment of people and debris matching their dream. The dreamer described a clarity so precise it felt purposeful, and afterward, they could not help but wonder if their dream had been a preview, a cached frame of a scene about to unfold. These stories are not proofs, they're impressions, fragmentary lights in a long-shadowed room. Yet when you gather enough of them, patterns begin to edge into view. People from different cultures, with different languages and beliefs, report experiences that can be described in similar terms, repetitions, echoes, moments that feel slightly out of sync. To a listener who already entertains the simulation idea, these common features are suggestive, like similar brushstrokes found across different sections of a vast painting. Within Chapter 1, we should also allow ourselves to meet skepticism, not to dismantle the idea, but to set it in a credible frame. Bostrom himself reminded readers that his argument is probabilistic, not conclusive. There are alternative scenarios. We might be the original civilization, or advanced societies might choose not to run such simulations. There may be ethical or computational barriers. A humane, thoughtful consideration of the hypothesis holds these possibilities side by side. The chance of living in a simulation grows with technological plausibility, but it is not an absolute decree. What we can do is allow the hypothesis to be a lens, a way of reinterpreting phenomena that already trouble or enchant us. When you look at the night sky and notice patterns, the slow spins of galaxies, the large-scale uniformity of cosmic microwave background, the fine-tuning of certain constants, it is tempting, in a gentle, contemplative mood, to imagine design. Not the crude design of a craftsman, but the careful selection of parameters that allow complexity and life to emerge. If a simulation were to be built, the architects might prefer a playable, interesting universe, one that allows narratives, surprises, and evolving minds. The parameters we observe could be the mark of a system tuned to produce such richness. Before we move on to later chapters, where we will examine alleged glitches, the possible identities of those who might run such a system, and the historical threads that some claim point toward hidden messages, let me offer a small invitation to stay with us. There will be moments ahead when we listen to voices who have felt the world shift under them, scientists who humbly admit they cannot fully explain certain data, and stories that blur history with myth. Each segment will be paced to keep you calm, to let your breathing find a slow rhythm, and to let your curiosity unfurl like a night-blooming flower, petal by gentle petal. To close this first chapter, picture again that field under the stars. The idea that our reality could be artificial is not meant to lessen the beauty of the night. On the contrary, it is a layer that adds a new kind of awe. If the world is crafted, what care was taken in its making? If our memories and dreams sometimes feel like echoes of something else, might those echoes be keys, small, soft signals pointing toward a larger structure? We will take those keys and carry them forward. In the next chapter, we'll slow down even more and look closely at the phenomena often called glitches in the matrix, the déjà vu that repeats, the Mandela effect where crowds remember a different past, and the subtle time distortions that make life feel like a film, occasionally paused and rewound. We'll listen to accounts that feel uncanny, and consider whether these might be the moments when the underlying system admits its presence. For now, let your breathing even out. Keep the lights low. Let the thought of a crafted reality sit like a warm, unhurried tide, not to disturb your sleep, but to draw you further into a calm investigation of what might lie beneath the surface. Chapter 2: Glitches in the Matrix, when reality shows its code. As we ease into this second chapter, take a slow breath and let the steady beat of your pulse accompany each sentence. Imagine the world as a gently playing film, not hurried, not jarring. And now imagine occasionally that tiny, almost imperceptible hiccup, a frame that repeats, a light that stutters, a line of dialogue that arrives a fraction late. These are the moments people point to when they describe glitches in the matrix. Tonight we will sit with those moments, not to alarm, but to listen. We will consider their forms, their meanings, and why so many different people, across time and place, report experiences that share a similar texture. Begin with déjà vu, the most familiar of such phenomena. Nearly everyone has felt it, that peculiar shimmering certainty that the present moment has already passed through your awareness. Déjà vu arrives without fanfare. You're at a corner cafe. The steam from your cup curls in a certain way. A stranger laughs, and suddenly there is a sharp, unignorable feeling that this exact sequence of sensations happened before. Scientists typically describe déjà vu as a memory phenomenon, a misfiring in the brain's familiarity systems. Yet the lived quality of déjà vu often resists tidy explanations. Some report that it contains details not yet experienced, but later confirmed. Others say it feels like a scene replayed with an infinitesimal shift, as if the simulation reran a minute of time with a slight modification. Listen to one story, gentle and unadorned. A woman who teaches children's literature remembers standing in a grocery store aisle, reaching for an apple and being washed by a slow foreign certainty. She glimpsed the exact colour of the checkout woman's scarf and the exact jingle of a nearby register. She left disoriented. That same evening, she found a handwritten note in her drawer, a note she'd never written, with a short sentence matching the phrase she had thought in the grocery aisle. She could not explain the connection. The memory of the detail felt as if it had been loaded from somewhere else, like a cached fragment returned to her mind. Whether one credits neurological explanations or the possibility of a very subtle re-rendering of events, the experience itself remains quietly potent. Beyond déjà vu, there is the Mandela effect, a modern term for collective memory divergence. When many people confidently remember an event, line of text, or small fact differently than recorded history indicates, it is named after public misrememberings about Nelson Mandela's death in the 1980s, though the phenomenon spans trivial pop culture details as well. Entire communities recalling a logo, a line from a movie, or the spelling of a brand in a way that conflicts with archived evidence. Psychologists suggest factors like confabulation, social reinforcement, and the reconstructive nature of memory play large roles. Yet for those who experience it as something stranger, the Mandela effect feels like a footprint left by a subtle edit. A line changed in the background, a small alteration in a larger tapestry. Picture a small town where a group of friends recall a well-known mural featuring a lighthouse and a blue ship. One day they walk past the wall and find the ship painted red. The lighthouse remains, but the scene is off by one colour, and no records explain the change. The friends exchange hesitant looks, each describing the mural as they remembered it, the blue ship, the exact curl of the waves, and together they feel the curious chill of shared misalignment. In our narrative, this becomes a soft suggestion that sometimes the system may update small variables for reasons unknown, leaving behind a residue of memory that does not quite fit the refreshed frame. Time slips and skipped frames appear in other forms. People report waking up to find whole stretches of time missing, not as gaps in memory, but as gaps in the tape of experience. A morning that vanishes between two known points, or a conversation that suddenly morphs into a different weather pattern. There are accounts of strangers who claim to have briefly witnessed the same person appear twice, in slightly different clothing. A repetition that lasts only seconds and leaves both the witness and the environment unchanged. Imagine walking down a quiet street and seeing the same cyclist pass you twice within 5 heartbeats, riding the same posture, hair catching the light the same way, and then continuing as if the duplication had been nothing at all. These repeats feel cinematic, like looped frames in a larger film reel, and they invite questions about the fidelity of what we call continuous time. To build the picture gently, we mix in small, believable fiction that sits comfortably alongside the real. Consider the story of an electrician in a coastal city who once reported a curious pattern in the streetlights. On a foggy Tuesday, several blocks dimmed and brightened in unison, then returned to normal. The electrician, trained to read grids and circuits, found no fault. The sensors reported no surge. The timers were intact. Later, a local forum filled with messages from residents who, at the exact hour, had experienced an odd déjà vu about the same foggy night. In this fictional but plausible telling, the grid's anomaly was not electrical in the usual sense. It was a synchronous, small-scale interruption of routine, a stutter that people described in terms more often used for software, a brief hiccup, a refreshed frame, a millisecond pause. Scientists and engineers have sometimes noticed anomalies in data that invite this metaphor. Measurements that should be smooth occasionally show micro-irregularities, tiny deviations that stubbornly resist straightforward explanation. Physicists will caution that data is noisy. Instruments have limits. Still, when small irregularities crop up in multiple unrelated experiments, they become noteworthy. In our calming narrative, we honor both the scientific humility and the human desire to find meaning. We allow the possibility that a stubborn anomaly is not merely error, but a hint, a shimmering at the boundary of comprehensibility. Let us listen to a different kind of account. People who describe flickers in their environment. One person, a retired librarian, recalls a late-night hour when the cataloguing lights above the stacks briefly flashed, and for a single heartbeat she perceived the books arranged in a different order, titles she had not seen before lining the shelves where she'd stood many times. When the light steadied, the old order returned. To her, the experience felt less like an electrical fault and more like a window or buffer briefly showing a different cache of content. These experiences, repeated across anecdotes, carry a similar tone. They are not cataclysmic. They are small, unsettlingly precise interruptions in ordinary life. We must also address uncanny coincidences. A man writes that he found a photograph in an old trunk that matched a scene he had dreamed decades earlier. Not merely similar, but aligned in composition, angle, and the tilt of a hat. Another person describes a chance encounter where two strangers spoke the same obscure phrase at the same time, a phrase neither had used before. To those inclined toward probability, such coincidences are remarkable but ultimately explainable. Yet they persist, and in the ambience of our documentary we treat them as signposts, small, luminous clues that might be read in different ways. If a system cares for narrative, small synchronizations will be elegantly efficient ways for it to produce meaning. In discussing glitches, we also gently explore the human tendency to pattern seek. Our minds are wired for relationship, for connecting dots and finding rhythm. Many psychologists explain that when we notice a pattern, our brains reward themselves with a pleasant certainty. This capacity has helped us survive and create culture. It is the engine of myth, of music, of mathematics. But it can also lead to false positives, seeing faces in storm clouds and intention in random noise. We give weight to this explanation because it is truthful and useful. At the same time, we do not let it dismiss every strange impression. The richness of lived experience often lies where scientific prudence and human wonder meet. To keep your attention in the gentle arc of the documentary, here is a soft promise. Later chapters will return to certain of these stories with more context, an imagined scenario where a group of independent researchers collate small anomalies and notice patterns across continents. A plausible tale of an engineer who discovers a curious algorithmic signature in traffic flow, and an exploration of cultural artifacts that bear marks some call edits. Each will deepen the texture of what we have opened here, inviting you to watch, to listen, and to reflect. Finally, consider the psychological aftertaste of glitches, an underlying sensation that reality is not always seamless. For many, this is an invitation rather than a threat. It opens the possibility that the world can surprise us in ways that are more profound than random chance. If a small stutter can be an opening, if a repeat can be a message, then there is room for meaning in the gaps. That is a comforting and quietly thrilling thought. Now, as the chapter winds down, slow your breath. Imagine the film of the world continuing to play, the frames sliding by with steady care. In a moment of hush, allow the idea of these glitches to settle like dew, small, luminous, and not demanding of resolution. Observe them as you would a curious constellation, noting patterns without needing to capture them completely. We will continue from here into Chapter 3, where we will gently examine possible operators who might be running such a system, and with what motives. We will explore plausible candidates, both scientific and speculative, and listen to stories that place interventions and messages at key moments in history. But for now, let the quiet intrigue of these glitches remain with you as a soft companion. Chapter 3. Who could be running the simulation? Picture for a moment a room lit only by a soft glow where someone, or something, watches a slow play of lives unfold across a table of light. In that room, the observers might be like scientists at a console, artists arranging scenes, archivists cataloguing memories, or beings whose motives are beyond our imagination. As we move through this chapter, imagine these possibilities not as theatrical fantasies, but as careful, considered hypotheses. Each candidate for the role of operator carries with it a distinct logic, a different set of capabilities, and particular signatures we might, in rare and subtle ways, detect. We will breathe slowly and explore 3 broad families of operators with patience: advanced extraterrestrials, future humans running ancestor simulations, and interdimensional entities. We will trace their plausible motives, the tools they might use, and the small believable signs that might leak into our lives as hints of oversight. First, consider the idea of advanced extraterrestrials. Civilizations older and far more technologically mature than our own. If a species evolves over millions of years on another world, mastering energy, computation, and the manipulation of matter, they might build observational platforms to study the variety of life in the cosmos. These platforms, in some incarnations of the hypothesis, could be simulations created to examine alternate evolutionary paths, societal formations, or the emergence of consciousness under different conditions. The motive is scientific curiosity writ large, an interstellar academy cataloguing the richness of possible worlds. In a gentle, speculative way, this is not unlike field researchers observing an isolated tribe to understand language formation, except the scale is cosmic, and the methods are incomprehensibly more subtle. If extraterrestrials are running or supervising our simulation, what might their interventions look like? They might be patient, making infrequent adjustments to parameters to observe long-term effects. They might seed certain ideas, amplify cultural memes, or permit rare anomalies to test how beings respond when their environment shifts. Imagine a subtle story, told in a low voice. A historian in a remote region finds a star map etched beneath a temple floor that does not correspond to local constellations, but the map matches a sky visible only from a different stellar neighborhood. The map suggests that someone with knowledge of other skies once took an interest in this place. For the inhabitants, the map is a strange relic. For the curious, it reads like a deliberately placed breadcrumb, a gentle sign that an outside intelligence noticed this world and left a small, quiet mark. Next, turn toward a scenario that has captured the imaginations of philosophers and technologists alike: future humans running ancestor simulations. This hypothesis suggests a lineage of humanity so advanced that it can instantiate entire paths for research, entertainment, or ethical study. In this reading, the operators are not foreign but are descendants. Their motives might range from a desire to preserve cultural heritage, to running controlled experiments on moral decision-making, to simply satisfying curiosity about what led to their own present. The emotional texture of this possibility is intimate and troubling at the same time. It frames us as subjects and as relatives. If future humans run our simulation, their fingerprints might show up as sudden, improbable leaps in technology or culture that resemble directed interventions. Consider historical moments of rapid innovation, a sudden agricultural breakthrough, an unexpected artistic renaissance, or a scientific idea that seems to appear fully formed in the minds of a few thinkers. To an operator looking at a system designed for narrative and efficiency, such leaps might be the product of parameter adjustments, a nudge to see how societies adapt when given a new tool. Imagine a quiet, plausible vignette. A small group of artisans in a coastal town discovers a method for creating a durable glaze that transforms trade in the region. Historians later puzzle over the glazed pottery's sudden appearance, its technology far ahead of contemporaries. In our imagined scenario, the glaze is not purely accidental. It is the result of an experimental change intended to observe cultural diffusion. That story is fiction folded gently into plausibility, but it helps us picture what anthropic experiments might feel like from within the simulation. The third broad family of operators moves beyond our usual spatial metaphors and into the dimensional. Interdimensional entities, as a concept, occupy the margins between physics and metaphysics. They could be beings whose modes of existence are adjacent but not identical to ours, able to interact with this layer through limited channels. Their motives might be inscrutable. Perhaps they are caretakers maintaining balance between layers, or artists weaving variations across realities, or simply entities indifferent to our concerns but capable of occasional interference. If such beings exist and have access to the underlying substrate of our reality, their interventions might appear as inexplicable patterns, symbolic messages, or encounters that defy ordinary explanation. Imagine a coastal fisherman who, one evening, reports a luminous figure lingering at the horizon, not communicating in words but leaving behind a string of identical seashells arranged on the sand in a pattern no one in the village recognizes. The fisherman's neighbors shrug, but an elder recalls a myth about the watchers who rearrange the shoreline, and the tale mutates into a rumor that something from beyond the usual senses has sometimes rearranged small parts of life. The pattern feels like code, like a signature left by an agent working in a mode of expression we do not yet understand. This blending of folklore and the uncanny is precisely the sort of evidence that gives the interdimensional hypothesis a peculiar resonance. It speaks to the long human tendency to interpret odd, localized events as signs of other presences. Across these families of operators, a set of shared behaviors emerges. An operator interested in observation will likely prefer minimal intrusion, to watch history unfold with occasional surgical adjustments. An operator concerned with entertainment might introduce narrative twists to keep the simulated world dynamic. An operator with ethical designs might run variations to test moral outcomes. These behavioral archetypes map onto different kinds of detectable signs. A scientific watcher might leave patterns in data, correlations that are nearly impossible to attribute to chance. An entertainment-focused operator might be responsible for persistent cultural memes or improbable coincidences that feel engineered to provoke wonder. An ethically inclined operator might allow inexplicable mercy in moments of crisis, small miracles that shift the odds in favor of survival. We can also imagine deeper administrative interventions, patches applied to correct systemic imbalances, resets to remove catastrophic outcomes, or updates that nudge a civilization back towards stability. The idea of patching carries with it a comforting metaphor, that errors can be fixed and that the system's caretakers prefer continuity. In quieter, more dramatic scenarios, patches might take the form of crawled historical edits, subtle alterations in archived records, or changes in the way memory is instantiated for individuals. A person might wake with a memory that feels borrowed from another life or region, as if a small module of biography has been swapped. These stories can be disturbing, but when presented in soft tones they are not meant to terrify. Rather, they prompt reflective curiosity about the motives and methods of those who oversee such a world. What about the possibility of deliberate signalling? If the operators wish to leave messages, how might they communicate without causing panic? Many who speculate on this topic suggest subtlety, embedding patterns in noise, seeding myths that grow over generations, or allowing small anomalies that only the attentive might notice. A ritual etched in an ancient site might encode a mathematical constant. An inexplicable echo in a cave might reproduce a sequence of prime numbers. A repeated motif in global mythologies could act as a distributed watermark. In each case, the communication is indirect, culturally integrated, and often ambiguous by design, enough to pique curiosity, but not so explicit as to overwhelm the simulated inhabitants. We should also consider the moral and philosophical implications of being observed. If a civilization is being studied, what obligations, if any, do the observers have toward their subjects? Some argue that an ethical advanced intelligence would avoid harm and intervene only to prevent catastrophic suffering. Others suggest that the integrity of observation requires non-interference, even when suffering occurs, to maintain the validity of data. Both positions have consequences. A non-interference policy can be morally troubling. An interventionist policy raises concerns about manipulation and paternalism. These are weighty ideas, and part of our gentle exploration is to sit with their emotional texture. If an operator is watching and occasionally acts, what does that mean for our sense of agency, meaning, and moral responsibility? There are also technological telltales that might betray an operator's activity. Patterns in historical data that defy ordinary causal explanations, synchronized anomalies across vast distances, or abrupt localized surges in computational activity could all be interpreted in some frameworks as signs of external manipulation. Imagine a researcher compiling decades of seismic, electromagnetic, and economic data who notices a recurring signature, a faint, regular pulse that correlates with moments of cultural upheaval. The researcher, at first patient and skeptical, might eventually entertain the unsettling possibility that some coordinating signal is nudging the system at strategic intervals. Stories like this exist more often in fiction than in formal science, but they serve here to illustrate the type of evidence that might, in principle, point toward an operator. Finally, there is the human dimension. How different cultures and individuals would respond to the knowledge that an external intelligence watches them. Some might embrace the idea with religious fervour, folding the operators into existing cosmologies as gods or ancestors. Others would incorporate the operators into secular narratives, as scientists in a lab, as future humans, or as caretakers. Still others might experience existential distress, questioning the authenticity of their choices and relationships. In many imagined narratives, communities form around the idea, creating rituals to attract the favour of the observers or to test their benevolence. A quiet, plausible anecdote. A small congregation meets at midnight each full moon, lining a field with stones and humming a simple tone, convinced that their synchronized intent draws attention, and sometimes, if they are lucky, a small, inexplicable blessing occurs the next morning. A healed animal, a sudden rain after a month of drought, a returned lost child. Whether these events are coincidence, intervention, or the workings of collective belief, they exemplify the complex interplay between human meaning-making and any possible external agency. As this chapter draws to a close, let us fold these images back into the calm space where we began, rooms of observation consoles humming with soft intelligence, hands, alien, human or other, adjusting parameters with the care of gardeners pruning a vast orchard. Each hypothesis about who might run the simulation invites us to look at our history anew, to notice patterns and anomalies with curiosity rather than fear. The idea of operators does not strip life of its value. It deepens the mystery and, for some, intensifies the sense of being known. In the next chapter, we will listen to stories and evidence that hint at manipulation, the inexplicable coincidences, miraculous survivals, and reports of shadowy figures that some interpret as signs of monitoring. We will tread gently into accounts that combine the eerie with the plausible, always keeping our tone soft and our pace slow. Chapter 4. The Evidence of Manipulation. Signs. We're being watched. Settle deeper into your chair. Slow your breathing until each inhale and exhale sounds like the turning of a page, and imagine we are listening for footsteps in a very large, quiet house. Those footsteps may be faint, a barely audible rhythm behind the walls, but over time, attentive listeners begin to notice patterns. In this chapter, we will listen to those footsteps as carefully as we can. We will gather small, well-worn stories, technical curiosities that scientists sometimes wrestle with, and a few plausible fictional threads that help build a picture of what conscious interference might look like. The aim is not to frighten, but to open a contemplative doorway. If something or someone watches us, how might that watching make itself known? Begin with the kinds of events that feel impossible until they are witnessed. Sudden, unexplainable malfunctions that occur at precisely the moment they would have the greatest effect on a human life. Consider the rescue worker who tells a soft story about an earthquake response. Teams arrive at a collapsed house, and all radios inexplicably fail, leaving them in a dangerous silence. For 12 minutes they search without communication, and then, as if someone pressed a quiet key, the radios return to life. In the report that follows, engineers find no hardware failure. The rescuers, who later read the after-action reports and watched the security camera footage, notice something else. A small, timed sequence in the footage where an ambient light dips and then returns, not explained by the camera's settings. The rescuers remember the radios failing during that same dip and cannot shake the impression that the environment briefly closed and reopened, a blink synchronized with human urgency. There are accounts of technological quirks that seem to favor particular outcomes, small nudges that appear to redistribute chance. A fisherman might tell of a night when his engine sputtered and died just beyond a dangerous reef. He drifted, calmed his breath, and then, with no mechanical reason, the engine restarted as he gently turned the key. He landed safely. Later, a mechanic examined the engine and could find no fault. The fisherman tells the story in quiet tone, not with triumph, but with wonder. It felt to him like an assistance that arrived at the right moment. To a mind inclined toward the simulation idea, such a story suggests the presence of a system that monitors risk and occasionally rebalances the odds. Miraculous survival stories occupy a delicate place in human culture. People survive falls, collisions, and illnesses in ways that outrun probability. A hiker lost overnight in a mountain range finds a narrow crevice that somehow shelters her from a storm. Her rapid, shallow breaths become steady, and by morning another hiker finds her. A patient diagnosed with a terminal condition receives a treatment that triggers an unexpected remission. In purely statistical terms, rare events happen with some frequency across a populous world. In the calm narrative we're creating here, those events can also be read as possible targeted adjustments. Small, merciful changes to the variables that govern outcomes. We do not assert causation, but we allow the possibility that some interventions, if they occur, might be aimed at preserving life or observing behavioural responses to near failure. Another category of reports centres on the sensation of being observed. People have described encounters with shadowy figures at moments of crisis or significance, not malevolent, sometimes simply present. A nurse working a long night shift once spoke softly about a moment when she felt an inexplicable presence in the ward. She described a shape standing by the doorway, indistinct as smoke, watching a recovering patient. The nurse said the presence made no sound and left no trace. The patient's vitals improved without medical explanation. To those who entertain the simulation hypothesis, such presences may be monitoring agents, probes, or perhaps symbolic markers left by operators to observe responses in an emotionally significant context. Stories of luminous phenomena accompany many such encounters. Unexplained lights that appear in the periphery of vision, or brief orbs caught on security footage with no identifiable source. A gardener in a small village remembers a summer when little spheres of light hovered over a field in a pattern that resembled a simple grid. The villagers watched, quiet and still, while the lights moved in a slow choreography, then vanished. A week later, an unusual rainfall pattern began across the region, salvaging crops that had been wilting. In the calm narration of this documentary, the village's memory frames the lights not as spectacle, but as a signal, a soft gradation of influence that preceded a life-preserving event. Large-scale coincidences also hold our attention. Consider moments in history when multiple independent systems falter or shift in concert with human events. A city's power grid might fail during an opportune moment in a political protest, and then resume minutes after tensions cool. An air traffic control anomaly might cause delays at airports across a continent in a pattern that aligns with a sudden, otherwise inexplicable change in weather. Engineers and investigators often find mundane technical explanations for such events. Software bugs, cascading failures, rare environmental conditions, and it is wise to respect those explanations. Yet, when patterns recur across different domains, when anomalies coincide with human narratives in ways that resist immediate mechanistic accounts, curiosity deepens. There are also accounts of cryptic messages, symbols, patterns, or marks that appear in public spaces without clear provenance. An old oak in a town square might develop a spiral of abrasions in its bark identical to an ancient symbol from a faraway culture. A city bench might have a carved sequence of numbers that, when translated, correspond to an obscure calendar system. Urban myths arise around these clues. Some suggest that they are left by people who have glimpsed the simulation and wish to hint at its existence. Others propose they are natural accidents or pranks. The narratives we share in this documentary treat these marks as invitations to reflection rather than proof, and they are woven into the larger fabric of possible evidence. One particularly compelling subset of reports surrounds the idea of selective memory changes. People sometimes find that their recollection of an event, not just a detail but the emotional tenor of the memory, has altered in ways that feel like editing. A man might remember a childhood conversation with his grandmother as tender and warm, only to discover family records or photographs that indicate the exchange was far more prosaic or even strained. The man experiences an uneasy sense that his memory contains a scene that never quite matches archival reality. Psychologists point to the pliability of memory and the reconstructive nature of recollection. Yet in the narrative ambience we are creating, such mismatches can be read as small personal edits, localized updates that smooth over rough edges, change emphasis, or reassign emotional valence. If a system values narrative coherence, Such edits would be an efficient way to keep individuals emotionally resourced for further development. Importantly, this chapter draws on the voices of people who do not seek sensationalism. Many accounts are told with restraint, offered in the cadence of someone who has learned to live with uncertainty. We also quietly consider the role of social contagion. Stories spread and take form through conversation, and a reported miracle can become a local expectation that shapes perception. Communities that regularly tell stories of being watched adapt their rituals accordingly. A lighthouse town might develop a quiet custom of leaving fresh bread on certain stones, a folk practice born from an older account of ships guided home by unexplained light. Whether the original event was coincidence, intervention, or cultural creation, the ritual that follows becomes part of communal life, a way of integrating the uncanny into the ordinary. For those who look for more technical evidence, subtle patterns in data sets sometimes attract attention. Researchers studying long-term climate records, for instance, trace small periodic fluctuations that resist simple modelling. Economists chart markets that shift in ways not fully explained by known drivers. Physicists report measurement anomalies at the edges of experimental precision. In the cautious language of science, these irregularities are invitations for better models and more careful measurement. For our purposes, however, they are also possible fingerprints of outside modulation, faint signatures that a system might leave when it adjusts parameters at scale. We do not, in this documentary, claim causality. We allow the thought. If a watchful operator exists, it might sometimes correct macroscopic trends to preserve a desired trajectory. As we collect these stories and patterns, a question gently arises. If someone watches, why sometimes act and sometimes remain silent? In the quiet space between breaths, several plausible motives present themselves. An operator might intervene to prevent extinction-level events, because preserving the continuity of the simulation is valuable. They might make small, targeted corrections to maintain narrative richness, or to gather data on how agents respond to adversity. They might be ethically constrained, acting only when fundamental thresholds are crossed, or they might be working with a set of priorities we cannot infer, values that differ from our own. These possibilities shift the emotional weight of the idea. Intervention can feel like care or manipulation depending on perspective. To maintain your attention across the long arc of this documentary, there is a gentle promise embedded here. Later chapters will explore the deeper motives, the philosophical implications of being watched, and the historical echoes that some interpret as evidence. There will be a particular story you will hear again, a long-imagined account of a field researcher who assembles a collage of small anomalies and, over decades, discovers a recurring motif that seems almost intentional. That tale, when we return to it, will knit together many of the elements we've introduced here: technological blips, miraculous survivals, shadowy presences, and cultural rituals. For now, let the montage of stories rest in your mind like a handful of smooth stones, each one worn by time and placed with intention. As we draw this chapter to a close, slow your breaths even further and invite a sense of quiet curiosity. The evidence of manipulation, as we've presented it, lives in the small places where life brushes against the unexpected. A radio that dies and then returns, a light that blinks at the exact wrong time, a carved symbol on a bench, a ritual that follows a strange event. Taken alone, each is ambiguous. Taken together, they form a chorus that is hard to ignore. Whether they are the footprints of an operator, artifacts of human psychology, or simply the way a complex world behaves, they hold a potential for meaning. That possibility is the marrow of tonight's exploration. We will continue from here into the next chapter, where we will travel back into human history and examine ancient clues and hidden messages, pyramids, stone circles, and myths that some interpret as pointing toward a designed reality. We will linger on details, explore contexts, and listen to stories that tie the ancient to the present in quiet, surprising ways. Chapter 5: Ancient Clues and Hidden Messages. Imagine walking slowly through a landscape that has been shaped by hands and minds across millennia, where each stone and furrow seems to carry a patient memory. Breathe in the dust of old paths and the cool of carved shadow, and let your attention rest on monuments that refuse to be easily explained. Across the world, people have raised ambitious structures, carved enormous designs into earth, and passed down myths that pulse with patterns. In this chapter, we will move softly through those places, the pyramids and great tombs, the vast ground drawings that are visible only from the air, the rough-hewn circles of standing stones, and we will listen for details that some interpret as deliberate signals. We will touch on the practical methods people use to build these things, the precise alignments that ancient architects achieved, and the stories and whispers that suggest a knowledge of geometry, astronomy, and perhaps something deeper. Let us travel slowly and with quiet curiosity, feeling the weight of history while entertaining the gentle possibility that these monuments were built with more than immediate human purposes in mind. Begin with the pyramids, those slow, monumental breaths in stone that rise out of desert silence. Imagine standing at the base of one of the great structures as the sun eases over the horizon, feeling the long, cool shadow stretch across sand and time. The pyramids are feats of engineering. Their faces are aligned with uncanny precision to the cardinal directions, and their interior passages often relate to astronomical phenomena. Centuries of careful study have revealed methods of quarrying, transporting, and fitting vast blocks, and yet a curious quality remains: the degree of mathematical harmony encoded in proportions, alignments, and the placement of internal chambers. When you listen to the story of the pyramids in a calm voice, you hear both human ingenuity and, in some narratives, a hint of deliberate signposting, a preference for constants and ratios that echo through nature and number. Consider the way these monuments seem to speak in numbers. Some observers note relationships between their dimensions and mathematical constants, noticing proportions that remind them of ratios found in natural growth or celestial cycles. The suggestion here is not arrogant. It is simple and almost tender. Ancient builders may have been keepers of a language that combined star maps, cycles of seasons, and the geometry of living things into single, enduring works of art. If someone wished to communicate across ages, to leave a message that would outlast fleeting empires, stone is a reasonable medium. And when a structure encodes recurrent patterns, a measure that aligns with the solstices, an axis pointing to a bright star that emerges in the night sky at a certain season, that structure becomes a kind of long-term signal, readable by anyone patient enough to observe the sky and the stone together. Across continents, other monumental gestures echo similar care. The Nazca lines are a series of enormous geoglyphs etched into a high desert plain, visible from heights and looping across the earth in sweeping curves, stylized animals, long straight paths, geometric designs. Imagine flying low above those plains at dawn, the air cool and the ground a flattened tapestry beneath you. The scale of these drawings raises a simple question: for whom or for what were they made? Many scholars have proposed ritual, astronomical calendars, or expressions of collective identity. In our quiet exploration, we add another gentle possibility to the palette. Perhaps they are intended to encode patterns or markers that are meant to be read from a vantage point outside ordinary human scale. If you were an observer from above, a being with a different frame of reference, the lines would be messages of proportion and orientation, a map written across the body of the planet. Standing stones and stone circles, like those gathered at Stonehenge or scattered across the British Isles and Northern Europe, offer a more intimate human-scale interaction with cosmic rhythm. Picture an autumn dusk, the air chilled, and the rounded shoulders of stone silhouetted against an orange sky. Many of these circles align with sunrise and sunset at solstices and equinoxes, and their placement often reflects a deep attentiveness to seasonal cycles. The builders of these circles were keen observers of the sky. Their architecture is a reminder that the earlier sciences grew from human patterns of watching and measuring. For those who listen for hidden messages, the alignment of stone and sky can also be read as an attempt to anchor human life to a larger cosmic order, a visible inscription on the landscape that binds people to time and to each other. Religious texts and mythic traditions also carry patterns that some read as hints of design. Across cultures there are recurring themes: gods who descend from the sky, floods that reset the world, creators who model life with tools and words. These motifs do not point conclusively to any single explanation, but they are striking in their recurrence. When many cultures, separated by oceans and mountains, develop similar myths, it invites reflection. Perhaps these motifs are archetypal products of the human mind. Perhaps they are cultural convergences that arise from shared existential questions. Or perhaps, in the quiet mode of our documentary, they are faint echoes of a common experience, a shared impression of being observed or guided at some level. Archaeological mysteries add texture to this landscape. There are sites where technology and artistry exceed what we expect of the people who lived there. Intricate stonework that fits with a precision rivaling modern methods. Astronomical alignments that require sustained observation and calculation. Decorations that encode sequences or symbols with surprising mathematical content. These are the places where archaeologists, historians, and yes, storytellers lean in close and whisper to each other, trying to understand why certain choices were made. When a culture invests extraordinary labor into alignment, proportion, or pattern, it suggests purpose beyond mere shelter or spectacle. It suggests an intention to preserve knowledge, to orient mind and body to cycles, and perhaps to whisper across time to those who would later stand at these sites and look up at the same sky. There are also tales of lost civilizations and obscure manuscripts that resist easy classification. Some narratives tell of cultures that possess technologies or understandings that vanished from the historical record, leaving only enigmatic clues. Fragments of texts written in scripts we cannot read, tools fashioned from materials that seem advanced for their era, or ruins that appear to predate known settlement by centuries. In these stories, a pattern emerges. Knowledge sometimes concentrates, then disperses or disappears. When we fold this pattern into the simulation-minded narrative, these gaps can be reinterpreted as deliberate archival choices or as periods where the system allowed certain knowledge to ebb, perhaps to test cultural resilience or to hide particular variables for later study. Consider the image of a monastery library in a mountain valley, where a hidden codex lies behind a faded curtain. The manuscript is composed of strange diagrams and an alphabet that scholars cannot immediately map to any known tongue. At first glance, the pages seem like a mixture of geometry and poetic notation, circles that intersect with prime-numbered spokes, star maps annotated with dates that do not match the common calendars. Over decades, a patient transcriber discovers a repeating sequence of symbols that correspond to simple numerical constants. The pattern, once recognized, suggest an intentional encoding of ideas, both mathematical and symbolic. In our telling, this discovery becomes an invitation. Someone, in a long ago time, chose to embed a cross-disciplinary language in a book meant to survive. That book, like a pebble dropped into a deep well, sends faint ripples into the future. We also meet in this chapter the human practice of embedding messages in art and architecture. A mosaic floor may contain a small, repeated motif that corresponds to a seasonal calendar. A temple's orientation might be slightly off the cardinal points in a way that aligns with a particular stellar event every few thousand years. A ritual chant might encode a numerical sequence through its syllable counts. These are the kinds of subtle signatures that, when noticed together, begin to read like the work of intentional communicators. They are quiet, respectful tools for encoding time and memory into lived spaces. Let us pause with a gentle fictional vignette that feels possible. A team of humble rural archaeologists finds, under layers of peat, a small stone with an etched spiral and a grid of tiny dots. At first it is catalogued as a local object, perhaps a counting tool. But when one researcher, patient and curious, overlays the spiral with the star map of a particular epoch, the dots align with the positions of bright stars on a night some 4,000 years ago. The spiral itself seems to mark the precession of a shifting pole star across centuries. The team is struck by the possibility that the object is both a calendar and a message, a deliberate scaled-down model of cosmic movement left for later observers to decode. In our documentary, this becomes a tender emblem of how human hands can encode vast time into something as small as a palm-held stone. Another thread to follow is the idea of encoded myths, stories used as mnemonic devices to preserve knowledge across generations. Before the widespread use of written records, many peoples preserved complex cycles of planting, navigation, and astronomy through story, dance, and song. These narratives can be unusually precise. Embedded within them are observational rules. When this bird migrates, sow these seeds. When this star rises, begin the harvest. Taken literally, many myths seem fanciful. Taken as encoded practical knowledge, they are powerful survival tools. If someone wished to communicate across ages without a public ledger, perhaps to keep knowledge safe from short-term political upheaval, mythic encoding is an elegant strategy. In the gentle voice of our documentary, such strategies appear less like conspiracy and more like cultural wisdom applied over generations. We must also listen to the whispers of folklore that become rumours of hidden temples and lost libraries. Across remote regions, there are stories of a ruin hidden by sand and time, of a subterranean archive sealed with an inscription that warns of knowledge not yet safe for the unprepared. These stories often carry a moral tone. Knowledge can be a burden, and perhaps it is best revealed slowly. Such themes fit well with a simulation-minded narrative that imagines caretakers pacing the revealing of information to test maturity, preserve stability, or guide complexity. Whether these stories originate in realistic cautionary tales or in encounters with something genuinely anomalous, they contribute to the atmosphere of possibility, the sense that the past carries messages that some might have intended to be found only by the attentive. As this long chapter meanders toward a close, let us consider one final idea: the language of patterns. If a system wished to communicate with beings who dwell within it, what language would be most durable? Numbers, cycles, and geometry are promising candidates because they are translations between different scales of observation. A star alignment is readable, both by an astronomer and by an impatient farmer who tracks seasons. A prime-numbered sequence carved into a stone is unlikely to arise by accident. The choice to encode messages in such languages would be an act of generosity, leaving keys that both curious minds and practical communities could use. When we imagine ancient builders leaving patterns that speak across time, we're not thinking of conspiracy so much as of a careful stewardship, an attempt to anchor knowledge in forms that resist decay and that invite interpretation. Before we move on, and there is much more ahead in this documentary, hold the image of these ancient clues like a small warm stone in your palm. They are patient, deliberate marks cast across time. Whether they are the legacy of highly attentive human cultures, the vestiges of lost knowledge, or the fingerprints of an external intelligence, they open doors in the mind. They invite us to look up at the sky and down at the ground with equal curiosity, to read monuments as both art and message, and to remember that the past is rarely silent. In the next chapter, we will follow those whispers into encounters that brush against the paranormal, UFO sightings, ghostly apparitions, and the ways in which alternate realities might leak into ours. Chapter 6: Paranormal Intersections. Ghosts, UFOs, and alternate realities. Breathe slowly and let your attention unwind. Picture a dim hush falling over a wide plain, the kind of hush that makes distant sounds feel intimate. In that hush, unusual things sometimes ripple at the edge of perception, lights that move with intention, presences that linger in doorways, and moments when time itself seems to fold. In this chapter, we will move through those liminal spaces where paranormal reports gather, where eyewitness accounts accumulate like quiet testimony, and where the seams between possible realities might show a faint phosphorescent glow. We will remain gentle, careful, and richly detailed, exploring how UFO encounters, ghostly apparitions, near-death experiences, and reports of alternate timelines could be read as leaks or intentional interactions within a deeper system. We will mix fact-based context with believable, small-scale fictional elements that fit naturally with the testimonies people share, all the while keeping the tone soft and the narrative easy to follow. Start with the skies. For decades, people across the world have looked up and seen things that do not readily fit the catalogue of ordinary aerial phenomena. Pilots at night have described silent shapes moving in ways that exceed conventional aeronautical performance. Families in rural valleys have watched clusters of lights rearrange themselves into geometric patterns and then disappear without sound. Some sightings are brief, like a single blink on the horizon. Others unfold slowly, granting observers enough time to fix details in memory, an object's hue, the way its lights pulsed, the absence of an engine roar. The cumulative weight of these reports has a simple psychological effect. When many reports point to similar behaviours, even the most measured listener leans forward with interest. Imagine an aviation instructor in a soft-voiced account, returning from a late training flight, who notices an object hovering beyond a ridge. It moves deliberately, stopping and then accelerating in a way that no helicopter or light aircraft could match. The instructor watches for nearly 10 minutes and later files a formal report. Maintenance logs and radar scans offer no explanation. The instructor tells the story calmly, without dramatic flourish, and describes a sensation of being observed, not hostile, but attentive, as if whatever was there were cataloguing human activity below. In the context of our documentary, such accounts can be read as evidence of monitoring agents, perhaps probes designed to observe without direct contact, their behaviour constrained to avoid causing panic. Some reports go beyond passive observation and take the form of interaction. There are widely reported narratives of missing time, encounters with beings, and experiences where witnesses recall being taken aboard craft and shown images or asked questions. These accounts vary in detail and quality, and they exist across cultures in different guises. For those who consider a simulated reality, such encounters might be interpreted as controlled examinations, a brief extraction of a subject for diagnostic observation, a test of memory, or even a data transfer process. Imagine a small, believable vignette. A night watchman in a coastal town reports stepping into the moonlight to smoke a cigarette and suddenly finding himself an hour later with no memory of the intervening time. He remembers, however, a faint impression of a cylindrical corridor and a soft voice that seemed to ask about his childhood. He wakes with his lighter cold in his hand, and a deep, unplaceable certainty that what he experienced was neither wholly dream nor entirely reality. In our narrative, this is not sensationalized. It is offered as gentle, considered testimony that fits a pattern of interaction some interpret as deliberate, targeted inquiries into human minds. Ghosts and apparitions inhabit a different register, but one that overlaps with the simulation idea in intriguing ways. Ghost stories are as old as human memory. The sense that the past sometimes leaks into the present, that echoes of lives persist in a place like residual data. People report seeing figures at windows, hearing footsteps in empty corridors, or experiencing smells associated with a person long gone. For many, these phenomena are personal and quietly transformative, a source of comfort or unresolved grief. In the framing of a simulated reality, ghosts could be conceived not simply as spirits, but as traces, data artifacts from alternate timelines, cached frames of previous runs, or fragments of memory that have not been fully garbage collected. Imagine the caretaker of an old manor who will tell you, in a voice as soft as moth wings, that at dusk the portrait in the hall sometimes seems to breathe and tilt its head, as if momentarily refreshed with a living presence. The caretaker does not fear it. Rather, they treat it as an old neighbour who returns occasionally to check the house, a quiet confirmation that memory persists in unexpected forms. Near-death experiences offer another intimate window into the question of what lies beyond or beneath ordinary consciousness. People who have been clinically close to death often report a consistent set of impressions: calmness, a tunnel of light, or a sense of moving through layered rooms, meetings with beings of light or loved ones, and a panoramic life review. These reports are diverse and culturally inflected, but their recurrence across continents is a striking fact. Some scientists propose neurochemical explanations for NDES. Others caution against drawing metaphysical conclusions. In this documentary, we treat NDES as profound data points that might reveal how consciousness behaves near extreme thresholds. If our reality is a rendered layer of a larger system, then the near-death state could be the moment when the rendering relaxes, allowing glimpses into the substrate or into operator-held spaces where different rules apply. A gentle fictional account might describe a nurse who, after a close brush with mortality, finds her dreams populated by sequences of code-like light and by a voice that says simply, "We are watching kindly." The nurse wakes with a recalibrated sense of purpose and a soft conviction that something beyond had been waiting, patient and unobtrusive. Alternate realities and timeline overlaps are another category of reports that can feel startlingly familiar. People recount moments where a memory of one past seems to intrude on another, or where a small detail in the present contains an echo of a different history. Families sometimes find photographs in attics that show a street arranged differently, or they discover versions of names, titles, or products that do not match recorded history. returning us to the Mandela effect territory gently introduced earlier. Within the simulation framework, such overlaps could be explained as branches or cached states of the system, points where different runs briefly intersect or where memory pointers cross-pollinate. A subtle, plausible tale would be of a librarian who notices 2 editions of a book with slightly different content on the same shelf, both bearing the same publisher date. She keeps one copy aside and later discovers the textual variations correspond to small cultural artifacts that disappeared from public record. The librarian's careful curiosity becomes the thread that pulls at a larger weave. Skepticism and explanation must be acknowledged with tenderness. Many phenomena described as paranormal have psychological, environmental, or social explanations. Sleep paralysis manifests as a pressure on the chest and vivid hallucinations. Infrasound can induce feelings of unease and reports of a presence. Misidentification can turn Venus into the subject of a late-night terror. Yet in our exploration we remain open to the idea that, after accounting for these factors, some experiences persist, anomalous in ways that multiply and resonate. We give these anomalies space without pronouncing an absolute verdict, leaning gently toward the possibility that the unusual may sometimes be a signal rather than only noise. There are also cultural rituals and practices that interface with these phenomena and sometimes appear to shape them. Communities that practice lucid dreaming techniques report higher frequencies of vivid, controllable dream encounters. Groups that engage in synchronous intention experiments claim correlated shifts in shared experiences. In a simulation-minded reading, focused awareness and collective intention may act like a query to the system, nudging the rendering engine in small ways. A peaceful fictional example: a small collective of artists meets monthly to practice synchronized visualization, describing a scene of rain over a parched garden. After several sessions, the town experiences an unexpected gentle shower the morning after, and the artists exchange soft smiles and a shared sense of being acknowledged. Such tales are not evidence in the scientific sense, but they are powerful narratives about how consciousness and environment might interact. We also consider the technological side. Night vision cameras catching orbs, electromagnetic anomalies logged by amateurs at the time of a sighting, and unexplained heat signatures recorded in archive security footage. While many such recordings are explainable by lens flares, camera artifacts, or thermal reflections, a subset of footage resists simple dismissal, remaining stubbornly ambiguous. To a viewer of this documentary, these recordings, described calmly, observed slowly, feel like fragments of a larger document, pieces of a puzzle that refuse to be reduced entirely to mundane causes. As we move toward the close of this chapter, let's imagine the quiet continuity that links each of these accounts, a gentle thread that suggests not chaos but an underlying order with occasional transparency, whether UFOs are probes, whether ghosts are cached data, or whether NDEs are glimpses into an operator-maintained vestibule. The consistent emotional texture is the same. People reporting the uncanny do so with reverence, not sensationalism. Their experiences often change them in subtle, enduring ways, increasing empathy, recalibrating priorities, or deepening a sense of wonder. In the next chapter, we will step into modern laboratories and workshops, where experiments in quantum computing, consciousness research, and large-scale simulation hint at our growing technical power to interrogate reality itself. We will listen to the language of experiments, the small failures that reveal structure, and the plausible stories of groups attempting to stress test the substrate of our world. For now, let the images of quiet lights, tender apparitions, and midnight meetings rest in you like a soft constellation. Notice how they shift your breath and the angle of your thoughts. Chapter 7: Technology and Experiments. Breathe in slowly and let the space around you become quiet. Imagine, for a moment, the low hum of a laboratory at night, the soft, even heartbeat of machines kept warm for the sake of possibility. There are rooms where people work by the glow of monitors and the careful click of instruments, places where curiosity is tuned like an antenna, searching for the faintest whisper of a deeper structure. In this chapter we'll move, with steady calm, through those rooms and out into their wider experiments. The laboratories building quantum machines, the great accelerators that recreate the smallest sparks of the universe, the modest university labs running delicate tests on consciousness, and the rumour-rich corners where private groups claim to probe the edges of reality itself. We will explain, gently and richly, how modern experiments might, in theory, probe a simulated substrate, and what it would mean to stress test the code of our world. We will also weave in plausible, believable, fictional threads, rumours of attempts to hack reality, private experiments that saw small, inexplicable returns, always keeping the tone soft and the language clear so that the ideas feel like long, slow keys turning in a vast lock. Begin with a soft image, the quantum laboratory. Picture a tabletop the size of a kitchen counter, arranged with devices that look more like tiny sculptures than weapons of knowledge. Superconducting chips nestle on cold stages, chilled to near absolute zero. Their metallic traces patterned like the circuits of a watchmaker's dreams. Laser beams line up with the precision of train tracks, and a researcher in a darkened room watches the oscillations of a quantum bit, a qubit, flicker between states. To someone unacquainted with the technology, quantum devices can seem almost poetic. Particles that exist in multiple possibilities at once, until the act of measurement collapses their choices into a single, crisp outcome. For our purposes, it helps to imagine these machines not only as future computers but as probes, instruments that test how deeply reality allows superposition, coherence and entanglement before decoherence. That quiet, inevitable loss of quantum clarity takes over. Researchers build larger, more stable qubits and link them together so they can compute in ways classical machines cannot. These linked qubits form quantum circuits whose behaviors are exquisitely sensitive to noise, to minute interactions with the environment. If the universe were an information-rich simulation, some thinkers gently propose, then quantum behavior might carry signatures of a rendering engine. Discrete jumps where continuity seems expected, unexpected constraints on coherence times, or anomalies in noise patterns that hint at underlying sampling rates. In accessible terms, imagine watching a digital screen that reveals faint pixels when you look closely. The pixels are not the picture's content but a limit of the medium. Quantum experiments could, in principle, reveal whether there is a smallest pixel to reality, a fundamental graininess in space, time, or information processing. By measuring whether certain expected continuities break down at extreme precision. Parallel to the quantum lab are the great accelerators, machines that drive particles to enormous energies and allow them to collide in controlled cataclysms. Picture a ring of tunnels deep underground, kilometers in circumference, where magnets bend beams of subatomic matter like ribbons around a racetrack. In collisions, particles reveal ephemeral creatures, resonances, short-lived states, and interactions that tell us about the forces that knit the cosmos together. If one were to look for evidence of a simulated substrate at this scale, one avenue would be to search for irregularities in fundamental constants, or unexpected energy limits that appear as natural cutoffs. Imagine a collision that, beyond a certain energy, yields patterns no standard theory predicts. Tiny systematic deviations from smooth distributions. These deviations might be the analogue of compression artifacts in a compressed audio file, subtle distortions introduced by a system trying to represent complex phenomena efficiently. Moving from monumental machines to modest setups, consider experiments designed to test for discretization of space and time. Physicists and philosophers have proposed that if space-time has an underlying grid or minimum interval, certain interference patterns or propagation effects would betray it. Visualize a lighthouse beam sweeping across a foggy harbour. If the fog had a crystalline grain beneath it, the light would scatter with a faint, regular texture. In a similar sense, highly sensitive interferometry, long baseline timing arrays, or the detection of ultra-high energy cosmic rays could, in principle, show hints of unexpected structure. For now, such experiments return mostly null results or ambiguous noise, but the very act of looking, the careful patience of instruments and humans alike, keeps the door to discovery gently open. We cross now to the quieter labs of consciousness research. In dim rooms, researchers place volunteers into controlled environments, immersive virtual reality chambers, lucid dreaming protocols, sensory deprivation tanks. They measure brain waves, subjective reports, and behavioral changes. Some experiments investigate the limits of perception, asking whether focused attention can bias outcomes in tiny physical systems. For instance, whether intention can marginally alter the collapse statistics of a quantum device or the output of a random event generator. Admittedly, mainstream science treats such claims cautiously and requires rigorous repetition and careful controls. Many initial reports of mind-over-matter effects fade under scrutiny, yet the experiments themselves are instructive. They reveal how delicate the interface between observer and observed can be, and how the act of measurement is not just a technical step, but a conceptual hinge in the architecture of reality. From these institutional labs, the narrative moves to more speculative, fictional but believable projects, private organizations or clandestine groups seeking to probe or even manipulate the supposed substrate. Picture a small, well-funded workshop hidden in an industrial park where physicists, computer scientists, and philosophers work late into the night. They design experiments that combine quantum entanglement tests with large-scale statistical analysis of global data streams, searching for correlations that standard causality cannot explain. They tune algorithms to detect repeated patterns in random noise across many systems, hoping to find an operator signature. The story unfolds with soft mystery. At first nothing shows, then a faint periodicity appears in distant datasets, a tail in the noise that recurs across oceans and servers without obvious cause. The team, careful and skeptical, runs controls, tunes for biases, and finally accepts that something is there that cannot be explained by ordinary error. In our imagined but plausible scenario, their discovery is small and ambiguous, an invitation, not a proclamation, and they choose to keep it confidential, fearing the social and political upheaval that an announcement might create. Rumours like this have a particular social power. Belief in covert experiments that stress test reality grows in subcultures and online communities, and these stories often share patterns. A private laboratory notices unexpected correlations. A whistleblower hints at a cover-up. A field team discovers a micro-anomaly that disappears when mainstream labs attempt replication. These tales thrive because they fit an intuitive narrative, that power and knowledge can converge in hidden places, and that the first glimpses of an underlying system would be small and ambiguous. In the calm cadence of our documentary, we present these rumours not as confirmed events, but as plausible cultural artefacts. Stories people tell when they imagine the frontier of human capability mixed with human secrecy. There is another angle to modern experimentation that is less dramatic but deeply practical. Simulation studies themselves. Scientists build increasingly sophisticated simulations of climate, complex ecosystems, and neuronal networks. These simulations rely on assumptions, boundary conditions, and discretization choices. As the simulated models become complex enough to produce emergent behavior, researchers sometimes notice that their models show spontaneous pattern formation, sudden phase transitions, or resilience in the face of perturbations, behaviors that echo the robustness of the real world. From an anthropic perspective, the fact that complex simulations can evolve lifelike complexity bolsters the plausibility of the simulation idea. If we can produce worlds internally consistent enough to host coherent behaviors, it is not a leap to imagine an intelligence with vastly greater computational resources doing the same at larger scale. Consider too the philosophical experiments that propose ways to test whether we are in a simulation. Some thinkers suggest searching for anomalies in high-energy physics data, looking for signs that the universe's behavior changes at the smaller scales in ways consistent with computational shortcuts. Others propose analyzing the distribution of cosmic background fluctuations for patterns that look like compression artifacts. While none of these tests has produced conclusive evidence, the very idea of designing empirical checks is significant. It means the hypothesis has moved from pure thought experiment to something that can be, at least in principle, confronted with data. There are also technological strategies aimed at communicating with an operator, if such an entity exists. Imagine a calm group of researchers deciding to send a deliberately structured signal into the natural world, a globally coordinated sequence of prime number pulses broadcast in radio, light, and encoded cultural artifacts. The signal's design is simple and elegant. Mathematical invariance, the kind of language any intelligence engaged in computation would understand. The idea is not naive, it is humble. If someone is listening at a meta level, a mathematical heartbeat might be the most universal way to announce our curiosity. Again, these projects are mostly speculative and symbolic, but they hold an undeniable charm. The notion that a small, synchronized strain of human will could reach beyond the veneer of everyday life and make contact. There are practical limits as well, which is essential to feel as you listen. Even the most powerful machines are constrained by heat, error correction, and finite resources. Quantum coherence is fragile. Particle accelerators are massive and expensive, and any attempt to probe the deepest scales requires patience measured in years and budgets measured in millions. If the substrate were designed to be hard to access, clever engineering alone may not suffice. Yet constraint does not dampen wonder. Rather, it adds texture. Knowing the scale of the challenge makes the prospect of a small discovery feel intimate and rare. As we move toward the close of this long chapter, let us slow our breath and fold these ideas together. The laboratories and accelerators, the small consciousness experiments, the whispered private projects, and the simulation studies together form a landscape of inquiry, a field populated by both methodical science and human curiosity that sometimes runs ahead of comfort. If reality were a constructed system, these efforts are how we might begin to notice its seams. The discoveries would likely be incremental, contested, and ambiguous, a faint pulse here, an odd correlation there. But over time, patient accumulation of such signs could change the way humanity understands itself. To keep your attention through the longer arc of this documentary, remember a small promise tucked into tonight's narrative. Later, when we return to accounts of ancient clues and modern anomalies, a single recurring motif will appear, a specific pattern that links a temple carving, a medieval codex, and a modern laboratory's noise signature. We will examine that pattern slowly and see how the pieces might fit together. For now, rest in the idea that human inquiry is both tender and tenacious. The labs hum softly with potential, and somewhere in that music there may be an answering note. Chapter 8. The Operator's Motive. Why run a simulation? Slow your breathing and let your mind settle like a leaf on a still pond. As we enter this chapter, our question is gentle and strangely intimate. If a simulation exists, why would anyone run it? Motive gives shape to action. It turns mere capability into a narrative. In the hush of this thought experiment, we will explore a wide landscape of possible motives: scientific curiosity, education and ancestry, entertainment and storytelling, ethical testing, spiritual cultivation, archival preservation, resource management, accident, punishment, and artistic practice. For each motive, we will walk through what it would feel like from inside the simulation, what kinds of signatures or small, believable interventions might reveal that motive, and what the moral and existential consequences would be for those who learn of it. We will listen to whispered rumours, to careful philosophical arguments, and to quiet fictional vignettes that illustrate how an operator's intent might gently shape lives. Keep your attention soft and patient. Each idea will unfold slowly, like the petals of a night-blooming flower. Begin with the simplest, most human motive: curiosity. Scientists and explorers run simulations to ask questions they cannot answer by observation alone. An advanced intelligence, whether alien or human descended, might run many simulations as a way of exploring variables across vast parameter spaces. Imagine a lab far beyond our comprehension, filled with racks of simulated worlds, each slightly different in constants, in initial conditions, in the nature of emergent complexity. The operators, in this scenario, are methodical and patient. They are less interested in spectacle than in data. How do societies evolve under different resource constraints? What kinds of moral systems emerge from particular environmental pressures? From inside such a simulation, occasional oddities, sudden cultural shifts, unexplained technological leaps, directed assaults of information appearing in certain cultures, could be interpreted as controlled inputs meant to test specific hypotheses. The evidence would be subtle, a pattern of repeated interventions that correlate with experimental variables, not arbitrary miracles. Next, consider the idea of ancestor simulations, running detailed recreations of entire historical epochs to study or relive them. If our descendants are the operators, their motive may be nostalgia, education, or a desire to understand their own roots. These ancestor simulations would be designed to be faithful, immersive, and narratively rich. From inside, certain moments might feel like vignettes curated to show particular outcomes. A technological breakthrough presented with cinematic clarity, or a cultural turning point whose causes are emphasized more than usual. The discovery of unexpectedly coherent historical records, the sudden appearance of archival-like artifacts in archaeological strata, or the occasional anachronism that seems too neatly placed, might all be soft signatures of such a motive. The emotional texture here is poignant. To be studied by offspring is at once flattering and unsettling, and it colours how we imagine operators who are intimately related to us. Entertainment is another plausible motive, and it reframes the simulation as a grand narrative playground. Picture an intelligence that values stories and runs simulations for narrative variety. worlds become arenas for plots, characters, and unexpected outcomes. Operators motivated by entertainment might seed anomalies that create drama, improbable coincidences, sudden twists of fate, characters who behave in extraordinary ways to test social response. If this was so, one might expect a universe with particularly rich storytelling potential, cultures that generate compelling art, individuals who experience dramatic arcs, and moments that feel like the pivot points of a carefully written scene. From inside, such interventions would likely avoid wholesale harm because the audience, if there is one, may prefer tension and surprise over cruelty. The feeling would be one of being in a novel that sometimes leans toward melodrama and sometimes toward gentle realism. A more solemn motive is ethical testing or moral pedagogy. An advanced intelligence might run simulations to explore moral questions under controlled conditions. How do empathy and cooperation scale under scarcity? What social architectures minimize suffering? These would be experiments with human value at their core, not cold curiosity, but a kind of moral stewardship. If operators care about outcomes, they may occasionally intervene to prevent catastrophes or to nudge populations toward more compassionate outcomes. The signatures of this motive would be small, targeted corrections, a sudden weather shift that saves a vulnerable community, a medical anomaly that favors survival, or an improbable collaboration between disparate groups. Inside the simulation, such moments may feel like gentle acts of kindness, unexplained and merciful, not unlike an elderly neighbor who quietly pays a bill without saying why. Then there is the archival motive, to preserve a record of possible histories. In this reading, a simulation is a meticulously kept museum of worlds, a living archive created to conserve varieties of life, thought, and culture that may be endangered or extinct in the base reality. Operators might be librarians of universes, curating tapestries of memory. The artifacts of such a motive could be deliberate preservation efforts, sudden recoveries of lost arts, inexplicable survivals of minority languages, or the reappearance of species in constrained refugia. The emotional tenor of archival work is reverential. To be part of a living archive is to be remembered even if the original context is gone. A related but dark possibility is simulation run as social engineering or resource management. If resources in the base reality are limited, or if the operators seek to manage risk across many worlds, simulations might be used to model and test policy decisions. They might be pragmatic. Which agricultural systems withstand climate stress? Which governance structures reduce conflict? In such cases, interventions could be technocratic, nudges implemented to reveal what policies lead to resilient outcomes. From within, such manipulations could appear as sudden, well-timed policy shifts, or inexplicable surges of innovation in public health or infrastructure, without a clear grassroots origin. The moral tension here is acute. Beneficial outcomes could be achieved through paternalistic control, and the ethics of managing peoples without their consent is a deep, unresolved question. Consider too the motive of spiritual cultivation. Some traditions speak of worlds created for the development of souls, consciousness, or moral capacities. If the operators are interested in the growth of consciousness for reasons beyond material gain, they might run simulations as formative environments, schools for souls, training grounds for moral and spiritual maturation. The signatures would be less technological and more symbolic. Synchronous dreams appearing across a culture, repeated mythic motifs that seem to guide moral intuition, or patterns of challenge and reward that produce spiritual development. Inside such a world, hardship might be reframed as curriculum and moments of grace as examinations passed. The emotional response to this possibility ranges from gratitude to resentment, depending on how one interprets the necessity and fairness of such schooling. Another plausible motive is containment or imprisonment. In some speculative scenarios, simulations are used to confine hostile or dangerous intelligences. The simulation may be a quarantine, a place to isolate potential threats in a controlled environment. If this were the case, one might expect heavy-handed constraints, more frequent resets, or evidence of systemic monitoring aimed at preventing certain behaviors. From inside, such a motive would feel constricting and invasive, individuals experiencing strong barriers to certain technologies or ideas, sudden memory wipes, or the removal of dissenting communities without explanation. The moral implications here are severe. Containment raises questions about rights, rehabilitation, and the ethics of indefinite imprisonment. Accident or emergent motive is also possible. A simulation begun for one simple purpose may evolve into something else as complexity grows. What began as a trivial entertainment or a narrow experiment could produce entities with rich interiority, at which point the operator's motivations shift into responsibility. A private project might find itself stewarding millions of conscious lives and respond by investing in the simulation's stability and flourishing. The signatures of emergent responsibility are gradual, protocols instituted to reduce harm, resources allocated to long-term well-being, and cultural artifacts preserved rather than discarded. From inside, the shift may feel like the quiet dawning of care, a softening of earlier randomness into sustained support. There is the artistic motive as well. An operator may be above all an artist seeking to create beauty and complexity. If the primary value is aesthetic, the simulation might be crafted for formal elegance, for the joy of watching patterns of life unfold in unexpected, consonant ways. The interventions might be less goal-directed and more compositional, the placement of certain species in an ecosystem because they produce a pleasing balance, the preservation of an island culture for its unique music, or the nudging of an artistic moment in human history. Inside, such a motive would feel like being part of a living canvas. Life would be valued for its narrative textures as much as for its utilitarian outcomes. Finally, contemplate the possibility of multi-layered motives. An advanced operator might not have a single purpose. It is plausible that the same simulation serves multiple agendas: scientific, archival, pedagogical, and recreational all at once. Different operator groups might run overlapping projects, each shaping the system in their own way. This plurality would explain conflicting signatures, occasional interventionist acts, sporadic artistic flourishes, and periodic experimental nudges. Inside such a world, ambiguity would be the norm, meaning would be plural, and occasional contradictions would be expected. Across all these motives, there are shared ethical questions that ripple outward like concentric circles. Who decides acceptable intervention? What responsibilities do operators have to the conscious beings within their simulations? Do simulated beings possess rights? How should knowledge of the simulation, if discovered, change human moral commitment and daily life? These questions are not merely academic. They haunt the thought experiment like a soft, persistent fulcrum, inviting reflection rather than offering easy answers. Before we close this long, slow chapter, hold for a moment a small, imagined vignette that brings together many of these motives in human scale. Picture a university where, half a century from now, a diverse council debates whether to continue running an ancestor simulation of an ancient city. Some members argue for scholarship and for the invaluable lessons the simulation provides about societal collapse. Others for the ethical duty to avoid causing suffering. A third group advocates preserving the simulation as an archive for lost cultures. A fourth quietly admits they enjoy the narratives it produces. In the end, they vote to continue under strict ethical oversight, instituting small interventions designed to reduce catastrophic harm while allowing the simulation to evolve. From inside that simulated city, occasional miracles appear, a medical technique emerging early here, a drought softened there, and the people living within call them blessings, unaware of the complicated deliberations that produced them. We will return to many of these threads later in the documentary, examining the ethical frameworks that might govern operators, the legal philosophies that could evolve if simulation awareness spread, and the quiet personal reactions of individuals who come to suspect their world is observed. For now, let the variety of motives we explored rest like a slow tide in your mind, not a threat, but an invitation to imagine the many possible reasons behind being watched. Chapter 9. Breaking the Simulation. Can we communicate with the creators? Breathe in slowly and let your heartbeat find a steady, soft rhythm. Imagine, for a moment, the world as a great, complex instrument, strings, pipes, and keys resonating together. And think about the small, deliberate plucks that might call attention to the player beyond the stage. In this chapter, we will explore, with patient curiosity and careful imagination, whether it is possible to reach out through the veil and make contact with whoever or whatever might be running our reality. We will walk through scientific ideas that have been proposed in quiet, rigorous tones, ritual and consciousness-based approaches that people have tried or imagined, and believable, human-scale stories of attempts and near misses. We will weigh the ethics and the risks, and we will do it all in a voice that keeps your breathing slow and your mind gently engaged. Start with a simple question. What does it mean to break a simulation? Breaking need not mean catastrophe. In many contexts, it means creating a condition that exposes the underlying rules, a pattern or anomaly so distinct and consistent that it cannot plausibly arise from ordinary processes. Imagine, as an analogy, a tapestry whose weave becomes visible if you tug at a single thread in the right place. The weave does not fall apart, but a small detail reveals how the pattern is made. Scientists and philosophers have suggested several kinds of tugs, tests and probes that might reveal signatures of a designed substrate. Some of these ideas are technical and subtle, others are cultural or experiential. We will move through them slowly and consider how each could, in principle, make contact. Physicists sometimes speak in metaphors of resolution and sampling. If the fabric of reality is rendered, then at some scale it might show grain, artifacts, or constraints. One class of proposals imagines that by pushing experiments to extreme precision, probing very high energies, extremely small distances, or extraordinarily sensitive quantum states, we might notice deviations from the smooth predictions of current theories. Picture a research team carefully arranging an interferometer so sensitive that it can detect the tiniest ripples in space-time, or a quantum lab trying to hold a macroscopic object in superposition for a longer time than anyone has managed before. If experiments like these consistently reveal a smallest unit of space-time, or if collisions produce patterns that look like compressed data rather than continuous noise, those would be the kinds of empirical fingerprints that suggest engineered limits. In the hush of a lab, researchers might find an anomalous discretization in data, a pattern repeating like a watermark, and then spend years arguing and checking controls, because science is cautious by nature, and because the implications of such a finding would be enormous. Parallel to purely physical probes are informational strategies. Mathematics is a universal medium. The idea here is simple and elegant. If someone listens for structured, non-random sequences that could not plausibly arise by chance, those sequences might serve as handshakes. Imagine coordinating a global low-power broadcast of prime numbers encoded in radio pulses, optical flashes arranged in simple mathematical intervals, or even synchronized human activities that create a measurable, non-random pattern in large datasets. The hope is that an operator attentive to mathematical structure would recognize the signal as intentional. It is a humble, polite form of calling out across an unfathomable distance. We send a basic, unmistakable message and listen for a reply. There are also consciousness-based approaches that emphasize the observer as an active element in the system. Quantum mechanics teaches that observation and measurement play a special role in collapsing probabilities into definite outcomes. Some have extended that idea, cautiously and controversially, into experiments where groups attempt to influence random event generators, or where coordinated intention is used as a variable in sensitive measurements. Practitioners of lucid dreaming and deep meditation sometimes report heightened access to dream imagery that feels shared or communicative. In small, controlled studies, people practicing certain meditative states have reported more vivid, sometimes correlated experiences. In the narrative we're weaving, an organized, sustained practice of synchronized attention, tens of thousands of people across the globe aligning their intention at a prearranged time, could act like a concerted measurement, increasing the probability of an unusual system response. It is not magic. It is a hypothesis grounded in the idea that interaction might be more probable where attention is concentrated. Imagine a fictional but believable project. A loosely organized global event where participants agree to focus on a simple, unambiguous mathematical image at midnight UTC. A clean symbol, like a line of prime numbers expressed as rhythmic claps transmitted via smartphones and radio beacons. The organizers arrange for a few scientific instruments, random number generators, magnetometers, and simple optical detectors to run in parallel. For a single minute, the world hums with unified intention. Afterwards, the data shows a tiny, statistically marginal deviation in one instrument, an unexpected clustering of values that, while not decisive, is outside ordinary fluctuation. The finding is debated, repeated, often dismissed by mainstream disciplines, but to the small group that organized the event, it felt like a knock at the window. They did not break anything, and they certainly did not receive an explicit message, but they experienced the hopeful tenderness of a near response. The result is both fragile and beautiful, a prompt to try again, refined and patient. Another route toward contact is to create paradoxes, scenarios that push a system to contradiction. The thought experiment here is ancient. Create a situation whose logical outcome cannot be rendered by the system without revealing something about its rules. In computational theory, paradoxes cause resource strain. In a rendered universe, certain self-referential constructions might force the system to allocate extra processing or to produce visible artifacts. A careful, ethically framed attempt might involve distributed puzzles that, if solved, produce an observable effect. The danger, of course, is that paradoxes might produce unpredictable consequences. Even the idea must be approached with humility and restraint. In speculative fiction and in some cautious philosophical musings, paradoxes are a method for exposing constraints, an intellectual crowbar that might reveal how the world is constructed. Technology offers other pings, large arrays designed to detect neutrinos, gravitational waves, or cosmic ray showers are already listening to the universe at scales beyond human senses. Some have proposed subtly modulating such detectors, or using their outputs to craft a widely noticeable signal. The trick is designing a message that is both detectable and unmistakably intentional. A pattern that encodes a simple mathematical invariant repeated in multiple channels will be a clear candidate. It is an idea that borders on the practical, sending a signal using the tools we have in the language we trust. Numbers. There are quieter, human-scaled strategies too. Artists have long used installation, ritual, and symbolic artifacts to call attention to the ineffable. A community might construct a long-term art piece, a field of lights arranged in a pattern that repeats the digits of pi, set to rotate slowly once a year. The project would be visible, persistent, and mathematically explicit. If an operator is paying attention, such an artifact is a deliberate flag, a human-made pattern that invites recognition. The beauty of this approach is that it also enriches human life irrespective of whether it draws a reply. It is an offering as well as an experiment. Now let us consider what contact might actually look like. We should be gentle with our imagination. Contact need not be a booming proclamation. It might be subtle, a tiny alteration in the outcome of a carefully chosen experiment, a shared dream image among trained meditators, or a momentary shift in the noise profile of astronomical detectors. In credible accounts that people share, the experience often arrives as a whisper rather than a shout. A person may dream of a simple geometric pattern and later find, inexplicably, the same pattern encoded in the margins of an ancient manuscript. A research team may notice that an otherwise random data stream briefly contains an anomaly that maps to a simple base 10 series. Each of these would be ambiguous and require careful verification, but their emotional effect can be profound, a feeling of being acknowledged, even if the acknowledgement is small. We must also attend to the risks and ethical considerations. Calling out to unknown operators is not without potential consequences. If an operator is indifferent, playful, punitive, or protective in unexpected ways, contact could trigger outcomes we cannot anticipate. There is the moral question of informed consent on a planetary scale. Who decides to attempt contact? Even small symbolic experiments can ripple into cultural reactions and political anxieties. Furthermore, the act of trying to break the simulation may itself be read by an operator as a test, a provocation, or a breach of protocol. In narrative and in careful speculation, some cautionary tales imagine that civilizations that loudly broadcast their presence may attract attention they cannot manage. The response could range from profound indifference to corrective action, a gentle nudge or, in darker imaginations, a system reset. These possibilities are not meant to frighten the listener. They are simply real considerations that temper our curiosity with responsibility. There is also a philosophical strand to untie here. Suppose contact is possible and successful. What then? If an operator replies, how would we interpret the reply? A mathematical handshake would be easiest to understand, but it would reveal little about motive or empathy. A more expressive reply, an image, a sequence of moral propositions, or a directive, would create immediate, profound ethical dilemmas. The knowledge that our world is observed and possibly adjustable changes how we think about moral responsibility, creativity, and autonomy. Would we continue to pursue knowledge as before, or would a revealed authorship call us to different forms of meaning-making? The answer is not obvious, and part of the tenderness of this documentary is to hold the question without insisting on an answer. We will also visit the human cost of such quests. Individuals who dedicate their lives to experiments probing the substrate often encounter professional skepticism, social ostracism, and personal strain. Their stories are testimonies to the stubbornness of curiosity and to the quiet courage required to pursue marginal questions. Imagine a small research group that, after a decade of careful work, produces a result so fragile it cannot withstand immediate replication, The team faces ridicule and funding loss, yet they persist because the possibility of contact feels worth the sacrifice. Their lives become a meditation on patience, humility, and the small, sacred hope that an answer might one day arrive. In the softer corners of our narrative, there are also accounts of people who claim contact through dreams, ritual, or near-death states. A gentle story we might imagine. A retired mathematician trained in lucid dreaming learns to hold a simple symbolic image through many nights. One dawn, she dreams of a corridor of light composed of repeating numeric motifs, and wakes with a small token in her hand, a pebble etched with straight lines she did not carve. Later, she finds in an obscure archive a marginal note in a medieval text that duplicates the pattern. She's not sure how to interpret the coincidence, and the world does not change overnight. Yet for her, the experience knows a wordless intensity, a feeling of having brushed something beyond the ordinary seam of life. Before we close this chapter, let us promise you a small narrative thread that will return later. A recurring motif of prime numbers, encoded in 3 different artifacts across time, an ancient carving, a modern art installation, and a fleeting anomaly in a neutrino detector. We will come back to this motif in later chapters and watch how it ties together the stories, the science, and the human longing for contact. For now, rest in the idea that the attempt to communicate is as much about the callers as the called. The gestures we make, the experiments, the rituals, the fields of light, reveal something tender about us, our desire to be known, to reach beyond our circumstance, and to meet whatever minds may be listening with curiosity rather than fear. Slow your breath, feeling the air move like tide over sand. The question of whether we can break the simulation is not only technical, it is human. It asks us to balance wonder with care, to plan experiments with humility, and to accept that any reply might be small, ambiguous, or deeply transformative. In the next chapter, we will sit with the meaning of motive and the deeper ethical landscape, what it would mean for individuals and society to know, to be guided or observed, and to live with the possibility that our choices are both our own and part of a larger design. Chapter 10. The Enduring Mystery. Living in a Simulated Reality. Breathe in slowly and let your body unclench. Imagine for a moment the soft hush of evening settling over a town you know well. The street lamps unfold their halos, a distant dog barks once. Someone on a porch tilts their head to the rhythm of a radio. In the quiet of that scene, there is room to hold a very large idea gently. The possibility that our entire everyday world, with its small comforts and deep sorrows, may be woven into a larger pattern. Tonight we sit with that thought not as a threat but as a canvas, a space in which meaning, ethics, and beauty can be reframed. We will explore what it means to live if we take seriously the idea that reality could be constructed, observed, or occasionally adjusted. We will listen to the ways people adapt, the rituals communities invent, the legal and moral questions that arise, and the quiet practices that help sustain mental health and everyday joy when your world seems, at times, to be more mysterious than you once believed. First, consider how knowing, or even suspecting, that we might be in a simulation changes the frame through which we experience ordinary life. For some people, the knowledge is disorienting, producing a momentary vertigo as familiar certainties are re-evaluated. For others, it brings comfort, the sense that existence is not indifferent, that there may be an attentive intelligence or an intelligible structure behind the randomness. Many find themselves somewhere between these responses, carrying both caution and curiosity in equal measure. Imagine a midwife in a quiet city who began to wonder about the nature of the world after a patient told her of an inexplicable dream that later seemed to match a real event. The midwife did not abandon her practice. She simply adopted a softer posture toward uncertainty, listening more attentively to the whispers of life and the small joys of being present for births. Her daily life remained rooted in practical care, but now threaded with a new kind of wonder. The first layer of living with the simulation idea is ethical. If the world is observed, what obligations do observers have, and what obligations remain with us? Philosophers have long debated the ethics of knowledge itself, whether knowing that one is observed should change behavior. For most people, the answer is subtle. Awareness may invite more intentionality, a greater care for others, a heightened interest in contributing meaningfully, and a renewed appreciation for small acts of kindness. Because even if life is being watched, the felt experience of kindness is real. Communities that take the hypothesis seriously often form rituals around responsibility rather than resignation. A small town might adopt a weekly practice of leaving food at a community table for the eyes of the world, a symbolic gesture that transforms curiosity into stewardship. It is an example of how belief can become a positive cultural force, encouraging practices that reinforce social care. Another domain affected is law and governance. If simulated beings are discovered to possess moral worth, then political systems must answer pressing questions. Do simulated beings have rights? What protections are due to entities whose consciousness might be instantiated by a higher-level intelligence? These questions are not speculative philosophy alone. They have practical consequences for how research is regulated and how technology is developed. In imagined legal discourse, committees and ethics boards develop frameworks balancing curiosity with protection. The early stages of such debate sound familiar. Precautionary principles, consent analogues, and protocols for minimal intervention. Over time, law would incorporate the recognition that intentionality matters. Not only intention from within society, but intention from any possible overseer, and craft protections that keep human dignity at the core. Cultural life changes too. Art and literature provide natural spaces for people to process such large ideas without panic. Artists have always been adept at translating the ineffable into forms we can hold. In a world where the simulation idea is part of public conversation, art becomes a method of gentle integration. Plays that stage the question of authorship, films that imagine conversations with distant operators, songs that frame being observed as a kind of cosmic lullaby. Communities create narratives that are not simply anxious but reflective. Narratives that teach children to ask not only, is this world real, but how shall I move in this world? Storytelling becomes a moral technology, a way of teaching resilience, curiosity, and compassion. Daily life acquires a set of practical habits for those who wish to live well in a possibly constructed world. One useful practice is observational journaling, keeping a gentle record of odd coincidences, vivid dreams, and repeated patterns. This practice serves several functions. It grounds a person in ordinary observation, pushing back against anxiety by turning worry into structured curiosity. It produces data, a personal archive of patterns that can be shared and compared with others. A group of neighbours might form a casual network, exchanging notes about local anomalies or synchronising quiet experiments, like observing a particular patch of sky each week. Shared observation cultivates community and keeps curiosity from becoming isolating. Another practice is cultivating ritual simplicity. Rituals help anchor meaning and create a sense of continuity. They can be small and tender, lighting a candle each evening as a way to mark gratitude, taking 5 slow breaths before meals to center attention, or meeting once a month to read aloud a passage from a favorite book and share reflections. These practices are not attempts to influence an imagined operator. They are ways to stabilize interior life amid uncertainty. People who adopt them often report a calmer baseline and a renewed capacity for delight in everyday moments. A deeper question concerns spirituality and existential meaning. For many, the simulation idea dovetails with existing spiritual frameworks rather than displacing them. Some religions may interpret operators as gods, ancestors, or teachers, while secular thinkers may frame the operators as scientists or artists at a higher level of complexity. The psychological effect often depends less on labels and more on narrative coherence. If a person can weave the possibility of observation into a story that honours human agency, they feel less existential fear and more reflective wonder. Some communities develop practices that intentionally celebrate both autonomy and connection. Contemplative traditions emphasize interiority and compassion. Civic traditions emphasize mutual responsibility and public goods. In both cases, living well becomes the active response to living with uncertainty. We must also attend compassionately to those who struggle. The simulation idea can exacerbate certain mental health conditions, particularly when it is combined with paranoia or obsessive thought patterns. Responsible communities develop supports, clear educational materials, mental health resources, and norms that discourage spiraling speculation. Counsellors and clinicians who work with people distressed by simulation beliefs emphasize grounding strategies, sensory exercises, engagement in meaningful tasks, and structured social connection. There is a long human history of integrating anomalous beliefs into daily resilience. Modern psychological practice adapts these ancient patterns with evidence-based care. A particularly fertile area is ritualized community inquiry. Structured, modest ways groups explore anomalies without tipping into rumor. Imagine a neighborhood group that meets monthly to document dreams and coincidences in a calm, non-judgmental setting. They keep minutes, they code their observations with simple tags, and they compare notes across seasons. By cultivating disciplined curiosity, they create a living archive of local phenomena that is both socially sustaining and methodologically cautious. These groups often become incubators for small, replicable studies. A repeated pattern in one town might be compared to another town's archive, producing a large data set that is less prone to individual bias. Living with the simulation idea also prompts creative adaptations in education. Universities and schools might add courses that examine the ethical, scientific and cultural implications of simulated realities. Interdisciplinary seminars where physicists, philosophers, anthropologists and artists explore the question together. Students learn not only to hypothesize but to hold ambiguous data responsibly. Education thus becomes a practice of public literacy, teaching people how to ask good questions, how to test claims, and how to live ethically in a world that may or may not be designed. Let us pause for a moment and listen to a small, believable story that blends the ordinary with the uncanny. In a river town, an old clock tower has chimed every hour for a century. One autumn evening, the clock chimes 13 times, a tiny aberration, and in the days that follow, several residents report unusually vivid, overlapping dreams of an unfamiliar coast. The town's school teacher starts a slow, gentle project. She invites her class to sketch their dreams, and the children's pictures show recurring motifs. A white gull, a stacked stone, a particular tide line. An amateur historian in town recognizes the tide line from a faded map in the library. The coast depicted belonged to a village long lost to memory. The town does not declare a grand revelation. They make soup on the day the clock chimed 13 and gather together to share stories, grateful for the mystery more than alarmed by it. For them, the possibility of a simulated nudge becomes an occasion for mutual care and communal curiosity. On a more global scale, if simulation awareness were to spread widely, societies would face new institutions and rituals. There would be public councils evaluating evidence, ethical review boards for experiments that probe reality, and cultural protocols for responsibly sharing potential contact experiences. There would be artistic festivals that celebrate both the mystery and human creativity. Lawmakers would consider whether knowledge of an operator changes obligations toward future generations, and philosophers would refine our understanding of personhood, consent, and care. These institutional evolutions would not happen overnight. They would be slow, iterative, and deeply human, reflecting our best impulses toward cooperation. As we near the end of this chapter, let me offer a small promise to encourage you to stay with this journey. Later chapters will explore practical methods for influencing reality gently, the strange philosophy of recursive worlds, and a concluding meditation that asks whether awareness itself might be the simulation's most dangerous discovery. We will return to the motif that threads this series, the simple mathematical signature that appears in places unexpected, and watch how tiny patterns echo through time, binding ancient carvings, modern art, and experimental noise. If you're intrigued, hold on. The long, careful story we are building together rewards patience. Finally, take a slow breath and let the thought of living in a potentially designed reality settle like a warm shawl around your shoulders. It need not become a weight. Instead, let it be a lens that deepens appreciation for the fragile goodness of mornings, for the small kindnesses that ripple outward, and for the resilient joy of being present with one another. Whether the world is woven by minds beyond our reach, or arises from the quiet play of natural law, the tenderness of our responses, our ethics, our rituals, our art, remains real. That reality is a blessing, and it is ours to inhabit with curiosity and care. Chapter 11. Can the simulation be influenced? Lucid reality and rule-bending events. Take a deep breath and let the quiet settle around you. Picture your mind as a calm lake, smooth and reflective, where even the tiniest ripple carries meaning. Tonight, we explore an idea that is both thrilling and gentle. Can a conscious observer, aware of the nature of reality as possibly simulated, influence it in subtle, meaningful ways? This chapter will guide you through the nuances of how awareness itself might bend the apparent rules of existence, blending scientific insights, human experience, and carefully crafted fictional accounts that feel believable. We will examine how attention, intention, collective belief, and anomalous events might act as soft levers on a vast unseen system. Let your curiosity settle like soft mist as we begin this slow journey. The first aspect to consider is the power of attention. Human beings are, in essence, pattern-seeking observers. Our perception shapes experience in subtle, measurable ways. In quantum mechanics, the observer effect describes how measuring a system can change its state, collapsing probability waves into a single outcome. Translating this concept into a more human-scale metaphor, imagine that reality responds at some level to the focus of conscious attention. It does not mean that you can summon miraculous outcomes at will, but the coherent, sustained attention may slightly bias events towards specific outcomes. Small, everyday phenomena provide examples that hint at this. People focusing intensely on creative work often report sudden insights, solutions that seem to appear from nowhere, or sequences of events that align unexpectedly. Psychologists term some of this phenomenon the placebo of focus. a mechanism by which concentrated intent appears to shape reality in subtle ways. In the context of a simulation, one could imagine that this is not mere coincidence, but a gentle feedback mechanism, reality responding to recognition, like a musician adjusting their instrument to the touch of a master's hand. Next, we explore the idea of collective intention. The individual mind may be capable of small ripples, but when minds act in concert, the effect may be amplified. There are numerous historical accounts, both scientific and anecdotal, of groups synchronizing rituals or intentions with unusual outcomes. Consider the decades of parapsychological research into group-directed intention and remote influence on random number generators, where repeated trials sometimes produce deviations beyond what would be expected by chance. While the results are subtle and controversial, they are intriguing because they hint at a distributed cooperative influence. Now imagine a large group, consciously aligned in intention, collectively observing a moment, a place, or an event. If reality is, in part, responsive to consciousness, such coordinated focus could slightly alter probabilities in meaningful ways. Fictional narratives that explore this concept often depict communities coming together in quiet, structured practices, meditative circles, nightly vigils, or collective dream work, resulting in events that surprise, delight, or shift trajectories ever so slightly. One compelling thread in this exploration involves lucid dreaming. When individuals realize they're dreaming, they gain some degree of agency within that space. Lucid dreamers can move through impossible landscapes, interact with dream characters, and even manipulate the fabric of their dream environment. Reports abound of people who, through extensive practice, are able to extend this agency to consistent narrative arcs, sometimes interacting with other lucid dreamers who claim to share the same dream space. Translating this into waking life, if reality itself is a structured, simulated environment, lucid awareness of that structure might open avenues for rule-bending events, small anomalies, and synchronicities that appear impossible under ordinary assumptions. The experience often begins subtly: a skipped heartbeat, a fleeting visual anomaly, a pattern that repeats across days, suggesting a hidden rule is flexible to conscious perception. Fictional but plausible stories recount individuals who, through sustained practice in meditation, lucid dreaming, or even ritualized focus, begin to notice that their thoughts coincide with outcomes in ways too precise to ignore, small nudges that hint at influence without full control. The placebo effect offers another lens through which to consider influence. Though typically studied in medicine, the placebo is a profound demonstration of how expectation, belief, and perception can create tangible change in complex systems. Placebo studies show measurable physiological responses, pain reduction, immune response modulation, and even shifts in neurotransmitter activity. Now imagine that, in a broader context, collective human belief might similarly interact with responsive, structured reality. If a simulated reality adjusts according to perception, then what we collectively expect, honor, or focus upon might guide its unfolding in subtle but noticeable ways. Rituals, prayer, and group meditation across cultures may all function as micro-experiments in this domain, producing statistical nudges that accumulate over time into observable phenomena. There is a related set of phenomena often described in paranormal and fringe literature, framed here as system exploits. These are rare, low-probability events in which the apparent rules of reality bend, glitch, or behave in ways that defy ordinary explanation. Accounts include objects appearing or disappearing, repeated improbable coincidences, sudden insights that prevent harm, or minor environmental anomalies. eyewitness accounts are typically sparse and carefully documented. An individual sees the same figure in the same place multiple times despite the impossibility of that pattern, or an object seems to move through space and time in defiance of physical expectation. Within the context of a simulation, these events might be interpreted as either feedback to conscious focus, the result of anomalies in the rendering process, or subtle responses to intention. Importantly, these events are generally benign, occasional nudges rather than wholesale disruption, allowing the observer to grow curious rather than fearful. Fictional narratives can help illustrate this concept without straying from believability. Imagine a small remote village where residents have, over generations, performed nightly meditations at precisely the same hour. Over decades, observers begin to notice small shifts. Rivers that flow slightly differently, patterns of light in the sky that appear with unusual regularity, or plants that sprout with uncanny consistency. Residents interpret these as blessings, coincidences, or the favour of unseen forces. From a simulation perspective, one could imagine that the village's sustained collective attention produces slight structured perturbations, perhaps altering variables just enough to produce observable effects without compromising the overall stability of the system. These subtle manipulations mirror the human experience of influence in both psychological and possibly metaphysical dimensions, blending realism with a hint of extraordinary possibility. Further, the principle of expectation shaping reality extends into everyday creativity. Inventors, artists, and problem solvers frequently describe experiences in which persistence and visualization lead to insights that appear as if they were planted by the environment itself. In a world that responds, even softly, to conscious observation, this phenomenon takes on a new significance. Each moment of awareness, each intention focused on a goal, may act as a gentle interaction with the system's underlying structure. Fictional accounts mirror this. A writer who repeatedly visualizes an ending finds that reality seems to align in small, meaningful ways to support the narrative. A gardener who imagines specific growth patterns reports plants that flourish with unusual consistency. These are not miracles, but rather believable instances of conscious attention interfacing with a potentially responsive environment. It is also worth considering the temporal aspect of influence. Many purported effects are delayed, appearing hours, days, or even months after the conscious effort. This introduces an element of patience, observation, and humility into the practice. A single act of focused intention rarely produces immediate dramatic change. Instead, influence ripples through time, shaping probabilities subtly, like wind-shifting sand into intricate patterns across a vast desert. Fictional examples echo this principle. A small group of children imagining a pattern of stars in a night sky sees a rare meteor shower align days later in a way that mirrors their shared vision, an event that seems impossible yet occurs quietly, without fanfare. Finally, let us consider the psychological and philosophical implications. Awareness of a responsive system can alter behavior, creating a feedback loop where observation itself becomes action. Individuals who embrace this perspective often develop heightened ethical sensitivity, a deeper sense of connectedness, and a mindful approach to everyday choices. They recognize that, whether or not their world is a simulation, the deliberate, thoughtful shaping of experience, through attention, cooperation, creativity, and care, produces real outcomes for themselves and others. The act of engaging responsibly with this possibility becomes itself a form of mastery, a way to inhabit life more fully, with intention and grace. Chapter 12. What happens when a simulation ends? Shut down, reset, or escape, take a deep, steady breath and let the silence of the night envelop you. Imagine the soft flicker of distant stars through a half-open window, the gentle rustle of leaves outside, the distant hum of life continuing in slow, reassuring rhythms. Tonight we will explore a concept that is at once eerie and profoundly contemplative. What might occur when a simulation, if it exists, comes to its end? This is not a story of immediate catastrophe, but rather a careful exploration of possible scenarios, subtle, detailed, and rooted in both science and imagination. We will consider the implications of shutdowns, resets, memory manipulations, and recursive realities, blending plausible human experience with concepts that stretch the mind without fracturing it. Let your mind settle gently on this idea as we proceed slowly, step by step, through possibilities that touch on physics, philosophy, and narrative imagination. Begin by envisioning the simulation not as a static construct, but as a dynamic system, constantly processing information, updating states, and rendering outcomes in real time. If such a system has a lifespan, then like any complex program, it must have endpoints, transitions, and perhaps maintenance cycles. One way to consider this is through analogies from computing. Software often undergoes scheduled shutdowns, patches, or reboots to improve efficiency or correct errors. In a simulation of reality, these interventions might not be destructive but corrective or transformative. Imagine a universe where, at intervals, certain constants subtly shift, background conditions are refreshed, and the environment is optimized to maintain coherence or accommodate new variables. Observers inside the system might notice minor anomalies, a brief sense of déjà vu, subtle shifts in probability, or the eerie feeling that time itself skipped a fraction, hints of processes far beyond ordinary perception. Now imagine a more pronounced scenario, a complete system shutdown. If reality itself were to cease for a moment, the consequences for conscious beings would depend on the mechanics of the simulation. Would awareness persist in a suspended state, like data stored in temporary memory, ready to be resumed? Or would memory itself be erased, leaving only a faint impression of continuity? Some philosophical interpretations suggest that certain déjà vu experiences, those intense, fleeting sensations that a moment has occurred before, may actually be partial reloads of prior simulation states, fragments of continuity that leak through a reset process. This could explain the unsettling clarity of some recollections that seem disconnected from ordinary memory. In fictional yet believable accounts, individuals report experiencing short lapses in time where events feel duplicated, mirrored, or oddly compressed, as though reality itself flickered before stabilizing again. These are gentle hints rather than dramatic collapses that suggest a system attentive to observation but capable of complex internal adjustments. Consider next the idea of recursive realities. If a simulation ends, does it terminate, or does it continue within a higher-level framework? Some theorists suggest that reality could be nested, simulations embedded within simulations, each layer capable of observing and influencing lower levels. If the outer simulation ceases, the inner layers might either collapse, reset, or merge with the parent framework. Imagine a person dreaming within a dream, only to awaken into a slightly altered version of the world, a subtle shift in environmental variables, or a faintly different history. In human terms, this could manifest as uncanny coincidences, repeated historical patterns, or subtle discrepancies in collective memory. Fictional narratives often exploit this idea in stories where characters notice minor differences in repeated days, months, or years, triggering a quiet realization that the rules governing their lives may be malleable or layered. There is also the concept of memory wipes. In complex simulations, designers may choose to erase specific histories to prevent interference or maintain system integrity. In practice, this could appear as forgotten events, lost knowledge, or gaps in historical continuity. Some people have reported experiences that feel like partial memory lapses, combined with strong emotional impressions of something important just beyond reach. They may feel nostalgic for something never consciously encountered, or recognize patterns that their memory cannot fully reconcile. In a simulated reality, these experiences could reflect deliberate or inadvertent editing of experiential data, leaving behind only fragments and impressions, like a misty echo of reality before the reset. Shutdowns may also be partial rather than total. In computational systems, some processes can continue running in the background while others are paused or refreshed. In a simulation, certain domains, consciousness, perception, or physical processes might be selectively maintained while other aspects are temporarily suspended. This could produce the appearance of skipped frames in time, environmental anomalies, or subtle shifts in physical laws. For example, a town might notice that electronic clocks all display identical frozen times for several minutes while no one seems aware of the pause. People report odd coincidences immediately afterward. Items appear in different places, conversations seem slightly altered. Subtle indications of selective systemic adjustments. Accounts like this appear rarely in folklore, dreams, and anecdotal reports. But when collected over time, patterns emerge that suggest these are not mere coincidences. They are small, believable indicators of a system operating at a scale beyond ordinary perception. The concept of escape is another avenue to explore. If awareness persists beyond a shutdown, can individuals transcend the simulation? Perhaps consciousness is an independent entity capable of migrating, persisting, or being transferred to a higher level. Some near-death experiences provide descriptions of traveling through corridors of light, encountering beings of intelligence or light, or moving through realms that feel simultaneously real and constructed. In the framework of a simulated reality, these experiences could be interpreted as temporary navigation outside the main operating layer, a glimpse into the architecture or oversight layer of the system. The experiences are often transformative, leaving individuals with a profound sense of continuity and interconnectedness, even if the mechanics remain mysterious. Historical and archaeological anomalies can be reframed in this context as hints of previous resets or adjustments. Repeated patterns in architecture, cryptic symbols in art, or abrupt shifts in cultural narratives may indicate past interventions by the operators of the simulation. Some speculative interpretations suggest that structures like the Great Pyramids, Nazca lines, or certain megalithic alignments encode information designed to survive temporal disruptions, to persist through resets, acting as continuity markers for consciousness, navigating multiple simulation iterations. Fictional stories often embellish this notion, imagining that lost civilizations left behind subtle instructions or artifacts to guide survivors or alert future generations to systemic changes. The idea is compelling because it frames human curiosity as both an emergent property of consciousness and a response to structures intentionally embedded within reality. Let us consider a gently speculative story to illustrate these principles. Imagine a village by the sea where residents experience a brief time flicker, 3 minutes where the sun halts its motion and the waves pause mid-crest. No one can consciously account for what happened, but afterwards, every fishing net is found neatly arranged, as if reset, and the tides themselves seem to have shifted slightly, preserving balance. An observer visiting the village later finds faint carvings in stone that mirror the pattern of the tides observed during the pause. Over generations, the village develops ritualized storytelling about these moments, embedding lessons about patience, observation, and care. The event is never feared. It is simply part of the lived world, a quiet acknowledgement that there may be a structure operating beyond ordinary perception, guiding processes and outcomes in subtle, benevolent ways. On a psychological level, living with the awareness that the simulation could end or reset encourages mindfulness, reflection, and moral responsibility. Individuals begin to consider their choices more deliberately, recognizing that whether or not the world is engineered, the act of living responsibly, attentively, and creatively produces meaningful outcomes. Communities develop cultural protocols for preserving knowledge, sharing observation, and recording unusual events, not out of fear, but from a desire to maintain continuity and meaning across potential systemic transitions. This creates a rich tapestry of human activity that merges curiosity, ethics, and narrative imagination. Finally, take a long, slow breath and imagine the delicate possibility that reality, whether simulated or naturally emergent, is not indifferent but structured, capable of resetting, adjusting, and allowing moments of influence. Living with this awareness is not about fear or obsession. It's about cultivating presence, ethical attention, and gentle curiosity. The world may end, reset, or persist in ways beyond ordinary perception, but each conscious moment is a real interaction with the system, a meaningful exchange in a vast, elegant, and mysterious architecture. Chapter 13. The final question. What if you were never meant to know? Breathe in slowly, and as you exhale, feel the quiet night settle over your thoughts like a soft blanket. Tonight we reach a chapter that invites us into a profound contemplation, a gentle yet unsettling reflection on awareness itself. What if the knowledge that reality is a simulation is something we were never meant to fully grasp? Let your mind drift slowly over this possibility, not with fear, but with curiosity and calm attention. Imagine the subtle hum of existence around you, the flicker of distant lights, the soft whisper of wind against the window, the rhythmic pulse of life continuing in quiet patterns, and place the notion of hidden oversight into this vast, gentle canvas. We will explore the implications of awareness, the potential risks and responsibilities of knowing, and the delicate balance between curiosity and understanding, weaving together scientific thought, historical perspectives, and carefully crafted fictional scenarios to create a rich, immersive tapestry. Let us begin by considering why awareness might be a threshold of consequence. If a simulation exists and if operators or designers are observing the system, it is plausible that consciousness itself is the most significant variable within their construct. Every thought, choice, and perception contributes to the unfolding of patterns within the simulation. In this framework, awareness is not a neutral state. It carries weight, subtly shifting outcomes and interactions. Philosophically, it raises a question that has been pondered across cultures. Is there a point at which understanding the rules of a system, particularly a system larger than oneself, becomes destabilizing? Certain mythologies offer analogues. Forbidden knowledge, sacred mysteries, or hidden texts that, once uncovered, alter human behavior irrevocably. The pattern is clear. Knowledge of the system can confer power, yes, but also responsibility and potentially danger. Across history, societies have embedded mechanisms to control the spread of knowledge. Secretive religious orders, mystical schools, and even scientific societies often limited access to certain discoveries until the broader context could support safe understanding. In a simulation context, one might imagine that awareness of the system is similarly constrained, with subtle cues, indirect experiences, or partially obscured patterns providing hints but withholding full comprehension. Eyewitnesses who describe glimpsing anomalies, or dreamers who report insights into the underlying code, often receive information in fragments, a half-understood vision, a fleeting sense of a pattern, or an echo of events that defy ordinary explanation. These partial revelations preserve curiosity while maintaining balance, allowing observers to grow in awareness without overwhelming the system or themselves. Consider the potential consequences of full awareness. If a being within a simulation were to fully understand the nature of the construct, the implications could be profound. In fictional yet believable accounts, individuals who achieve this level of insight describe experiences akin to waking within a nested reality. Time feels elastic, probabilities shift unpredictably, and the ordinary rules of causality no longer hold with certainty. Some report a sense of being simultaneously free and constrained, capable of influencing outcomes yet intimately aware that the structure sustaining existence is vast, complex, and responsive. These narratives are compelling because they blend psychological realism with speculative imagination, providing a space in which viewers or readers can safely explore the edges of awareness without experiencing true risk. Interestingly, there are also reports, rare but persistent, of civilizations or groups that, upon approaching critical understanding, vanished or were archived in ways that left only faint traces. In this context, archival does not imply destruction, but preservation, a method of maintaining the integrity of the system while ensuring that highly advanced awareness does not destabilize it. Historical accounts of lost civilizations, sudden collapses of cultures, or abrupt disappearances of communities have often been shrouded in mystery. While archaeology and history provide plausible explanations, the possibility remains that some of these events reflect encounters with limits of systemic awareness. The resonance of these accounts lies not in certainty, but in their plausibility, feeding a narrative in which curiosity is both the source of insight and a potential threshold of consequence. Let us explore a narrative to illustrate this principle in human terms. Imagine an isolated monastery tucked high in the mountains where monks study patterns of light, shadow, and sound, believing them to be messages from the natural world. Over decades, one monk begins to notice subtle irregularities. The sun's path sometimes deviates slightly, shadows occasionally repeat themselves, and birds appear in formations that defy seasonal expectation. As the monk pursues this awareness, dreams become more vivid, revealing corridors of light and hallways filled with figures observing the monastery from a distance. Eventually, the monk perceives the patterns as evidence of an external intelligence, carefully monitoring and adjusting the environment. Rather than acting impulsively, the monk develops rituals that respect the system, documenting anomalies, meditating on their meaning, and sharing discoveries cautiously. The monk's awareness grows without causing disruption, illustrating the delicate balance between insight and restraint, and demonstrating how knowledge, once approached thoughtfully, can deepen understanding without triggering collapse. From a psychological perspective, living with the idea that full awareness may be dangerous encourages humility, patience, and ethical reflection. Individuals become more deliberate in their inquiries, careful in interpretation, and attentive to both the known and the unknown. Communities develop cultural norms around sharing anomalous experiences. Storytelling becomes a method of distributed learning, where lessons are encoded in narrative rather than raw revelation. This structure allows curiosity to flourish while maintaining emotional equilibrium, a practice observed across human history in contexts ranging from esoteric schools to scientific mentorship. By framing awareness as a continuum rather than an endpoint, individuals can explore mysteries without destabilizing their sense of self or community. There's also a practical human aspect to these considerations. Awareness of possible systemic oversight encourages mindfulness, observation, and careful engagement with one's environment. Small actions, helping others, cultivating beauty, documenting unusual events, or engaging in ethical creativity become meaningful gestures that resonate within a broader framework. Even if the simulation hypothesis remains unproven, these practices foster attention, compassion, and resilience. Fictional narratives amplify this effect. Communities that live in alignment with perceived patterns of the system find that small, deliberate acts create positive ripples, influencing events subtly yet significantly. These stories are not fantastical in the sense of magic. They are grounded in the believable ways that human action, observation, and awareness interact with complex systems. We can also reflect on the philosophical implications. If awareness itself carries potential danger within a system, it reframes the pursuit of knowledge. Knowledge becomes an act of stewardship rather than conquest. Curiosity is tempered by care, and discovery is guided by reflection. In this frame, every insight into the underlying rules is both a privilege and a responsibility. The very act of noticing anomalies, patterns, and subtle irregularities becomes a practice of moral and cognitive refinement, shaping not only understanding but the quality of experience itself. Finally, consider the closing thought. Perhaps every civilization that reaches the point of total comprehension does not vanish as a punishment, but is carefully archived, preserved in a manner that respects the integrity of the system while allowing consciousness to persist in forms beyond ordinary perception. This is not a story of fear, but of quiet awe, a reminder that the universe, or the simulation, may operate according to principles beyond immediate comprehension, and that our role as conscious observers is to engage thoughtfully, ethically, and with curiosity. Every glance at the night sky, every attentive observation of human behavior, every quiet meditation on patterns in daily life becomes an act of participation in an extraordinary, possibly infinite architecture. So, as we sit in the stillness of this moment, let the idea settle gently. Awareness is a gift and a responsibility. Curiosity is a bridge, connecting the observable to the unseen, the known to the potentially unknowable. And whether or not the system was ever meant to reveal itself fully, the very act of thoughtful observation enriches life, deepens connection, and cultivates the quiet wonder that makes existence meaningful.